colleagues and staff. The plan and budget process is never a simple one, but there is no doubt in my mind that this will be one of the most challenging budgets for us as a council and for us as a community. Looking back, who would have thought that gas prices and interest rates would be where they are? These are real costs to everyone in our community, including the region and its operations, those services that we deliver that the community counts on. I know that we as a council will do our best with the information we have and the difficult times, frankly, we are faced with. I also know that where we are today and the projections before us are not where we will be in March. In fact, we have a lot of work to do. The plan and budget process is where we will roll up our sleeves and make the hard choices, balancing the ability of residents to pay with the expectations of those residents on service levels. Today is simply the beginning and which we will focus on information and context that staff have prepared. My goal throughout this process will be to keep the conversation moving while creating space for everyone around the horseshoe to have a chance for their voice to be heard. But I will keep us moving along. On that note, during the staff presentation, there are designated points where staff will pause to allow for questions. I will hold off on calling anyone until we get to these points. In order to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to ask questions, please limit yourself to one question and one follow-up. If you have more than one question after that, you can join the speaker's queue again, and I will call on you once everyone has had the opportunity to ask their first question. And just a reminder that everyone in person and participating electronically will be using eScribe for requesting to speak. So with that, I will call on our CAO, Bruce Lochner, and the team to kick us off. Bruce.
Great. Good afternoon, Council, and through you, Chair Harris. As the professional staff, we're very pleased to be here for this first plan and budget committee meeting of the new term of Council. I wish I could sit here today and tell you this was going to be an easy journey, but we all know that it won't be. The good news is we're not making any difficult decisions today. As Chair Harris said, today's about context and information that will help us all make tough decisions throughout this process. Today, we'll provide an overview of the process that staff have undertaken over the last number of months to prepare a draft plan and budget. We will share the listening that we've done in community to better understand their needs, and I'm confident that what we heard will reflect much of what you've heard from residents as you knocked on doors. We'll provide an overview of the proposed plan for next year to meet those needs and position residents in our community for future success. And we'll provide an overview of the fiscal and economic context making this an incredibly difficult budget to prepare. As you know, Waterloo Region is one of the fastest growing communities in Canada, if not across North America. Budgeting in a municipality that's growing is hard enough in a quote normal year. If you add to the fact that most of our services, from water to affordable housing, from keeping roads safe to paramedic services, are all essential services. And so how do you choose? Demand for services continues to grow at a pace much higher than the revenue to deliver those services. But that's not all. It gets even more difficult. Today you heard Craig talk about how he hasn't seen a budget like this in years. On top of all those pressures that I talked about, this year, inflation is the single largest contributor to any potential tax increase. The sheer size of the inflation number and things like the cost for fuel for buses, for ambulances, for snowplows, and so on, would be about a 7% tax increase on its own. Fiscal pressures aren't new to us. We found a lot of efficiencies in the past, and as Chair Harris said, we have a lot of work to do in the coming months. To just give a practical example of how big the financial impact of inflation is on our budget, if you look at 2023, it's about the same size as our annual tax levy for Stage 1 at Rapid Ion service. It's also about the same size as the total annual tax levy for childcare, senior services, and Ontario Works Administration combined. So when Craig comes up in a few minutes and says he's never seen a budget like this, he really means it. Inflation is an absolute monster. We also have received word from government recently that the social services relief funding is ending December 31st, meaning we have even less revenue for things like housing and those experiencing homelessness. As Council, I know you're worried about these impacts and what that might mean in terms of projected taxes for next year. We are too. As staff, we're very concerned about affordability and delivering value for taxpayers. We're equally concerned about the need for more revenue so we can protect the services that residents rely on and making sure we don't negatively impact the ability for people to support themselves and take care of their families. This is what keeps me up at night, and I know keeps our senior team up at night. I've heard some in community say staff are recommending a double-digit tax increase or staff are recommending a single-digit tax increase. Neither are accurate. We're at the beginning of the process. This is the start of the discussion, and through the process, we'll get a much better sense of what services council wants to increase, where you want to see changes, and perhaps even services we'll no longer offer, or will have to offer in a different way. Our hope is that at the end of today's meeting, you'll have a better understanding of the work that staff have done over the last number of months to support residents and their needs as we prepare for the next year. We also will go over a budget timetable for your consideration that outlines the conversations we'll have in the next few months and when you will have to make those tough decisions. The next few meetings are all about listening, reflecting, and talking about what intentional strategic decisions we need to make together. Today's that first step in the journey over the next few months. I'll now turn it over to Connie to speak a little bit about the process to get us here today. Thanks, Chair.
Great, and thank you, Bruce. Our annual plan and budget is Council's greatest policy tool to achieve strategic objectives and meet the evolving and changing needs of residents. When the region's strategic plan was set in 2018, no one could have predicted what we would go through and where we would be today. And while we use strategic foresight to anticipate future trends and challenges, the process that we go through each year, listening to community, reviewing new data and insights to calibrate our plans annually, is incredibly important. In the coming months, through our annual plan and budget process, Council will calibrate our strategic and annual business plan objectives, establish our service levels for the coming year, approve financial and staff resources to deliver those services, establish the property tax levy for the year, and set user rates, fees, and charges. This collectively will determine the work that we will do as an organization, the services that we will provide, and the resources that we will utilize to deliver outcomes for residents across Waterloo Region. A quick reminder that every 4 years, Council sets the organization's strategic direction through our strategic plan. Our current plan is coming to a close, and we will begin immediately working with Council on our next strategic plan. The annual plan and budget, which we're currently developing, operationalizes the strat plan and gives us the opportunity to prioritize the work that is needed to move towards achieving our strategic goals. While this annual process is critical, given the current challenges and pressures that we are facing, this year it is felt even more important. This is because the annual plan and budget gives us as staff the opportunity to deliberate increasing demands that may be stretching traditional mandates, something I know we're seeing a lot of. To respond to fiscal pressures, providing a line of sight between our goals, objectives, and fiscal strategies, to break down silos, promoting cross-departmental and community collaboration. It also allows us to identify specific annual priorities with strategic dialogue and a lens on risk management. And it allows us to build an accountability by providing the basis for progress tracking, learning, and reporting on results. Well, today is our first plan and budget meeting. This is something staff have been working on for many months. A lot of work has gone into getting us to where we are today. The annual plan and budget process starts in late spring, and while many may have enjoyed their summer holidays, staff are working on departmental and divisional business plans, identifying opportunities to better support residents, and finding efficiencies to reduce costs. The most important part of the process is the community engagement, which is continuous throughout the year, but also throughout the annual plan and budget process, and something we are constantly considering and will talk more about today. As we started this work, there were a number of guiding principles that we shared and kept in mind. The first was that the strategic plan guides everything that we do. We are absolutely committed to delivering results for residents. The second was that we need to invest in critical elements of organizational success to ensure that we're able to deliver results and the services that residents rely on. This means thinking about employee well-being, identifying and deploying innovations that will lead to greater efficiency. We know that we need to digitize now and faster to reduce future costs. It means organizational support for the change we are all experiencing, and that will only continue to increase as we innovate and digitize to provide the services of the future. And ensuring we have capacity to remain competitive in an increasingly complex and challenging labor market. As we'll get into later, talent attraction and retention is and will continue to be one of our greatest risks. We also committed to reviewing service levels to reflect changing needs and to recommend adjusting service levels to accommodate fiscal pressures. Reviewing the responsibilities of other levels of government that are currently funded in whole or in part by the property tax levy, ensuring adequate asset renewal funding, and avoiding approaches that will make future budgets more difficult. This has been a quick overview of the journey we've been on to today, and of course today is one more point along that journey to the final plan and budget in the new year. I've mentioned community engagement a few times and how critical it is to the process. I'll now turn it over to Director of Corporate Strategy and Performance, Jenny Smith, who will introduce the next portion of our presentation on the engagement approach and insights.
Thank you, Connie, and good afternoon, Chair and Councillors. So I'm Jenny Smith. I'm the Director of Corporate Strategy and Performance, and part of my role is to work with my colleagues around the Horseshoe and across the organisation to support you on the plan and budget process. I hope to get to know you all over the coming months as you create a new strategic plan for the organisation, a process in many ways you're actually starting today. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about community engagement. This is really foundational to everything you'll hear today and throughout the plan and budget process. Thousands of conversations and collaborations with residents and businesses and partners happen every year in many different ways and in very different spaces. What we've learned is that these diverse voices are all very clear on their vision for themselves and for their community, and we're listening. Every one of these touch points shapes our plan and budget in some way. Each time a resident takes the time to talk to us or collaborate with us, their voices shape many decisions and choices all across the organisation. So you'll notice that I'm not here alone to talk about the importance of community engagement. I'm very happy to introduce some of my colleagues who engage with communities in very different ways. Their work is integral to the decisions that you'll make throughout this process, and each of them will talk briefly about their approach to community engagement and share a little bit about what they're hearing. This is not to say that we've all the answers or that we've heard from all the voices. We haven't, but we're learning. So in person with me today, we have Deb Berge from Community Engagement, who's there at the podium right now. We also have Tara Bedard from the Immigration Partnership and Alison Pearson from the Children and Youth Planning Table. And online, we have Fazia Beg and Paula Whitlow from the Reconciliation, Equity and Diversity Inclusion Office, who will also speak today. So I'm going to hand it over to Deb, who's going to start us off and provide some information about the engagement that's currently happening. Over to you, Deb.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm very happy to be here today. So as you've heard, community engagement really is a critical piece of the whole strategic planning and the budget process. So what we really want to acknowledge is that this work is building on many engagements and many conversations. We have many master plans, the Community Safety Wellbeing Plan, the Regional Official Plan, many examples of engagements that we've had with the community that we'll continue to build on. But what I do want to talk about today is some specific strategies that we've had related to the 2023 plan and budget process. So we're going to just give you an early sneak peek at some of these results. We're still getting information in, we're still analyzing results, but we've had a couple of significant pieces of work underway, and we just want to kind of provide you with a bit of an update as to where that's at. I'll be speaking to a few early results from our statistically robust telephone survey conducted by Ipsos Reads that we reached almost 1,000 residents across the region. And we've also launched an online engagement site on our Engage WR site. And we have a survey there that's broadly available to anybody who would choose to complete that. We also have an option for people to ask a question. We have an option for people to request a community conversation if they wanted to have an in-person opportunity. And as those dates are available, we will be publicizing the public input sessions that are available to delegate directly to council. We've promoted these opportunities quite widely. We've had a press release, we've advertised on our website, we've advertised through the Engage Waterloo Region site, social media, through community partners, newsletters, and we do have a video that talks about the plan and budget process that is being translated into multiple languages as well. So to talk a little bit about our telephone survey, and I will apologize for an error in the appendix to the original report. The survey was conducted in the fall of 2022, so over the month of October, not 2021. But you can find in the appendix to the engagement report a little bit more detail than what I'm providing to you here. But just to give you a bit of a summary, not surprising when we asked residents about what the top issues facing the community, housing and homelessness was by far the most often cited issue, followed by healthcare, roads, public transportation, and other issues that you can see there. So on the next slide. So one of the other questions we did ask is about preferred paths for taxation and service delivery levels. And you can see from one of the charts here that 43% of residents were in favor of increasing taxes in line with inflation in order to maintain existing services. Next, we have 22% that were looking to maintain current taxation levels by reducing service levels. Then we had 14% of people who were looking to reduce current taxes and reduce service levels to accomplish that. And then 12% were looking to increase taxes and actually increase or enhance service levels. 81% of people felt that they received fairly good or very good value for their tax dollars. So these are preliminary results. We're still digging into kind of demographic trends and other kind of questions. Many other questions were sort of asked. So we're looking to come back in January with a more fulsome report on all of those findings, but just wanted to kind of provide a little bit of an overview highlight. The other piece that we have underway is our online survey, and this is the survey, as I mentioned, that's on the Engaged Waterloo Region site. So this is something, whereas the original survey for the telephone was randomized to specific households based on demographics and various factors, this is something that's generally available to anybody who wants to provide their input into the region. So this is up now. It will be on our website until the end of the year so that people have ongoing opportunities to provide input. Again, it's been promoted through a number of different methods and channels. As of yesterday, we had 811 responses, so we're hoping to get many more, but great to sort of hear from a number of people. What we're seeing so far with those responses are fairly in line with what we're hearing from the telephone survey. So some similar questions were asked, and we're not getting a lot of different type of flavor of response for those. Once again, as I mentioned, the council input sessions, the budget schedule is approved today. We will start to promote those sessions as well through a wide variety of channels. So that is all I have to say. I'm going to pass it over next to my colleagues online from the Reconciliation, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion team, and I believe Paula Webster is going to start that off. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Deb. And Sago Squagrego, good afternoon. I'm Paula Whitlow, Wolf Clan from the Mohawk Nation and resident of the Six Nations of the Grand River Territory. I'm the Director of Truth and Reconciliation, and I'm joined by my colleague Fajia Bag, who is the Director of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. Our department, the Office of Reconciliation and Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, or REDI, R-E-D-I, as we call ourselves, is still very new and was created in response to community calls for action and the region and council's commitment to truth and reconciliation, anti-racism, equity, diversity, and inclusion. As an office, our mission is to advance truth and reconciliation and equity, diversity, and inclusion by creating systemic change within the organization and facilitating community-wide system-level changes. In simpler terms, we're working to make a community where everyone has the opportunity to thrive by transforming the way the region collaborates internally and with community. And now I'm going to pass it over to Fazia.
Thanks, Paula. Good afternoon, everyone. The region has heard many times through many different ways that systemic issues and discrimination exist in our community. We know that this has been disproportionately experienced by First Nation, Inuit, Métis, African, Caribbean, and Black identifying, racialized, and other marginalized communities who continue to face systemic barriers. Focused on building trust and relationship through meaningful community engagement, by formal and informal conversations with many community organizations, leaders, grassroots, the REDI team has centered the voice of community. Moving away from a rigid or set way, we are building an adaptable and accessible system for all. We know that we cannot change outcomes if we don't change our methods. Our work is guided by and grounded in Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls to action to the Reconciliation Action Partnership, Region of Waterloo Safety Wellbeing Plan, ongoing community engagement, research and collaboration, and local calls to actions and recommendations. And all of these are examples of how we've listened, learned, and acted on community feedback on decolonizing processes and offering services that are culturally safe, enabling self-determined communities by redistributing power and resources to community organizations, and making representation meaningful and decision-making meaningful as well. We will be sharing more on these initiatives and other presentations to Council. Since the creation of the REDI team, we have been working in completely new ways of engaging those with lived experience, engaging staff in leading REDI initiatives to better support residents, and changing how we approach data and data collection, and introducing community-led collaborative work across systems and sectors. While much of this is about changing the region as an organization, core to it is the understanding that this work cannot and should not be done alone. Community has shared with us that we need to work better across systems. And so we continue to work towards reducing silos internally as we work collectively across the region and community. When we are building strong relationships, when we are elevating community voices, and when we're building collaboration into the way we work, we are creating change. We are creating change, really, within the community and across the organization. The community has shared that people, their experiences, and intersectionalities are most important. So we continue to center people into what it means to be a regional government. We are showing that there are ways to be heard by the region, ways to be involved with the region, and ways to help the region improve our community. I'm going to turn it back to Paula.
Now, there's so much to summarize about what we do, who we do it for, and why, but I'll leave you with some of the messages we're seeing and hearing from our community. They are telling us that something feels different about our approaches in a positive way. They are telling us that they are feeling empowered, and they're telling us that change is for the better and is possible, and that they're feeling like the region can be their partner and ally in this work. We know we have a lot more work to do, but we're committed to continuing to evolve and grow alongside community. Next, I'll turn it over to Tara Bedard, who will speak to you about immigration partnership. Yahweh.
Hello? There we go. Sorry. Thank you, Paula. Good afternoon, everybody, and through the chair, I'm going to shift us now from talking about some of the work that Fazia and Paula have been speaking about and centering the work that we do through the Immigration Partnership in the context of Waterloo Region as a community of immigration. Since the first settlers arrived here several hundred years ago, immigrants have helped shape this community, and they are today, and they will continue to do so in the future. We have a long history in this community of recognizing the important contributions of immigrants. And since 2009, this community has come together through the work of the Immigration Partnership to create the conditions for all immigrants in our community to reach their full potential and contribute to a thriving and prosperous community for everyone. The strategic pillars of our work are settle, work, belong. As the name implies, we are a partnership initiative that brings together and is led by immigrants and others from more than 60 different regional immigrant and community service, business, municipal, post-secondary, ethnocultural, and other organizations. The region of Waterloo is the host of our partnership, a partner among many, and regional staff participate across our work. Our work is about the engagement of immigrants and those supporting them, to understand community priorities and catalyze strategies for change. We prioritize direct immigrant involvement and in leadership in our work, and we seek to elevate immigrant leadership in the community. Currently, 55% of our partners and staff are immigrants themselves. We engage immigrants and those who support them in many ways. We do significant research aligned with our strategy for building community through immigration, through a biannual immigrant survey and an annual survey of all of our community partners. This provides a foundation for priority and direction setting for ourselves and others in the region. Engagement and learning take place in many other forms and forums ongoing throughout the year. Next slide, please. Immigration is changing Waterloo Region. This has been and always will be the case. Today, we are seeing this at an accelerated pace due to the federal government's intentional growth of immigration over the last 10 years in both permanent and temporary forms. In 2014, the federal government set to welcome 260,000 permanent residents to Canada. The target for 2025 is 500,000. At the end of 2021, there were 1.4 million people in Canada on a temporary work or study permit. This was an increase of 85% from just 2015. We have been seeing and responding to the impact of this in our work in the community, and the 2021 census provides us with some concrete data about what those big numbers mean here in this community. Waterloo Region now ranks 6 of all 41 large urban areas in Canada for the highest proportion of immigrants in the overall population. There are now 147,190 immigrants in our regional population. In context, this is a population larger than the cities of Waterloo or Cambridge. At the time of census, there were almost 28,000 recent immigrants in the local population. This was nearly double what we saw in the 2016 census. This is people who had moved into Waterloo Region in the 5 years before the census. And amongst those almost 28,000 people, there was really greatly increased diversity. 62.5% of those people had come from Asia. The history of white European migration into our region has significantly changed. Recent immigrants were more than half of Waterloo Region's overall population growth. I would also like to point out, and the census really underlines this, that we are a refugee resettlement community. We're one of around 40 resettlement communities in Canada, and this greatly impacts the proportion of how immigrants come into our community. We have a much higher proportion of refugees in our population than most other communities in Canada. The federal government's policy is to select for resettlement those people who are the most vulnerable amongst all refugees. This has real implications for the services and supports that are needed for people who are coming into our community. The census also counted over 22,000 temporary residents in this community. We know from our work in this region that that number is very, very significantly underestimated. Our last count in 2018 saw over 35,000 people. As the population changes, so does our ways of being, relating, living, our desires, and our expectations. Next slide, please. We invest great effort as a community to hear specifically from immigrants about their experiences of living here and accessing services, about their challenges, what helps them, and what their priorities are. In our last biannual survey of immigrants in 2021, 1,507 immigrants shared with us their experiences. They came from across our rural and our urban geographies. They represented all major categories of immigration. Half of them had lived in Canada for under 5 years. They were highly educated. They were diverse. Nearly 3/4 of the respondents were racialized individuals. They spoke more than 80 languages. They shared the many ways that immigrants contribute to the vitality and life of the community. They told us many good things and also many challenging things. Most were satisfied with their life here, but more than 10% were not, and 24 had negative experiences of settling and integrating here. They told us their most common challenges were finding work, making friends and social connections, finding housing, and being socially isolated. When asked what would help them most, they talked about affordable housing, more programs and supports for them to find work and to support employers in our community to hire, retain, and promote them in their workforces, to provide more opportunities for learning English, and for actions to reduce racism and discrimination towards immigrants and others. Not all immigrants in this community experience life in the same way, and some have more challenges than others. And just a few of those groups that really stood out when we were doing this survey included those who can speak less fluently in English, those who are living on low income or unemployed, those who are Francophone, who are Muslim, who are Black, recent immigrants, international students, and refugee claimants. These and other insights shared provide the region and our community overall with a roadmap to help guide priority setting. Thank you. And I'll hand it over now to Allison.
Thank you, Tara. Good afternoon. Through you, Chair Harris, my name is Allison Pearson. I'm the manager with the Children and Youth Planning Table. If you are not aware of the Children and Youth Planning Table, it's a community collaborative in our community that's been in place for over a decade now. Our work is hosted and housed here at the region of Waterloo within economic development. And the work is about understanding the ways we can collectively impact child and youth well-being across our community. Part of our work is around the ways that our system is best coordinated, and a large part is about how we bring adults and young people together to impact change. It's important to realize that the young people, our youngest citizens in the community, are 1 in 4 of your residents. So you just heard from Tara, the immigrant population is 1 in 4. Keep that similar stat in mind as you think about your youngest citizens. They're 1 in 4. And when we think about good ways of hearing the voices of young people, one of the best tools that we have in our community now is something called the Youth Impact Survey. This is a survey that we developed locally with young people in collaboration with UNICEF Canada. It's a first of its kind in Canada, and it looks at 9 domains of well-being that we get to hear firsthand from young people about. We first ran this survey in our community in 2020 and had a chance to hear again from young people in 2021. This last go, 2021, we heard over 1,000 diverse voices from across the community. And that data over this last year has been shared through a series of data briefs, as well as disaggregated snapshots. I hope you've had a chance to see some of this data. There are 7 in total as of today. They include hearing voices specifically of those with a gender identity other than a boy or a girl, those who are living with a long-term physical or mental health limitation, and today's release is experiences of those not born in Canada. That survey is the starting point for understanding well-being of our youngest citizens. If you look at the image on your screen, you'll see those 9 domains that I spoke about that the survey touches on. Unfortunately, what we can see in the data is we are trending in the wrong direction. As I mentioned, we had a chance to hear voices in 2020 and again in 2021, and we are either holding steady at levels that are far lower than a pre-pandemic level or dropping significantly. I'll give you just a couple of examples today. When we think about sense of belonging, which the membership of the CYPT has really come to understand as foundational to well-being of children and youth, we see it at about 2 in 3 that feel a strong sense of belonging, and 1 in 3 that don't. That's about 20 percentage points off of our pre-pandemic levels. When we look at experiences of discrimination, 41.3% are sharing with us that they have had experiences of discrimination over the past year. That's holding steady of what we heard in 2020 as well. Mental health is on the minds of many people, and with young people, this is one of the most steepest declines we are seeing, with only about a quarter of folks indicating that their mental health is doing well at this point. And a question that we added unique to our community was about feeling valued as a community member. And it's certainly concerning that only half of our young people surveyed feel that they are valued as a community member. So where do we go from here? What we've been able to do as a collective is go back to those young people and talk to them about this data, talk to them about what would meaningful change look like to turn some of these trends around. And we have just in the last few days released their work, which is called Data in Action. It's a compilation of over 60 actions that young people have shared that said, they said would lead to meaningful change. And now we have it as a resource in our community, categorized by those 9 domains that we just spoke of, but it also includes ways that young people can be involved in that change, as well as adults. It should be a very helpful tool for all of us as we go forward in the next year to come. And I'll hand it back over to Connie now. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Allison. We really appreciate the collaboration on engagement. And I want to thank Tara and Deb and Allison and Fazia and Paula for sharing all of those insights with us. We really wanted to give a sense of some of the engagement inputs that staff are considering as we develop our plan for next year. And I'll pause here for any questions from council specifically on the engagement information.
Oh, sorry.
Councillor Deutschland?
Okay.
He's getting ready here, I think.
Can you hear me all right?
Got you now.
Okay, my apologies. My headset was, it's charging. So if my head gets zapped, it's because it's up to the charging. So just a couple of questions. First off, on page 12 of the presentation were questions about services and level of services. And if you could go to that for a moment. Is that slide 12?
I believe it's back to the resident
There.
telephone survey.
Yeah, so the resident survey. So in the resident survey, you're talking about services, level of services. Was there any discussion or questions asked about services versus capital expenditures in the region?
Through the chair, I'll defer to Deb Berge on if there were any specifics around capital in the Ipsos Reid survey.
That level of distinction wasn't part of the question. It was simply asked about, as it's stated there, so would you like to increase taxes in line with inflation to maintain services, or vice versa? So there wasn't that level of distinction, but.
Thank you. I just thought that was a relevant distinction because you're also talking about a decrease in the level of services as a question. And I think going forward, I'm just putting this out there that as we consider, how should I put it, standards on capital improvements, et cetera, which is a standard that would have been set at one point, but what sort of standard are we looking forward to going forward? And are there opportunities there where funds can be diverted that we have discretion on to trade off certain capital expenditures with service expenditures rather than just having services compete with each other in terms of what are we maintaining and not maintaining? That's one. The other thing I wanted to ask, and it would go out to go to Ms. Begg or Ms. McDonald or what have you, but we just had a number of grants that were announced to a large number of community organizations, which was tremendous. But I'm just wondering, how do those grants equate to us in our budget deliberations here? And I was presuming that these grants were working to assist in some of the issues that have been identified as problem issues with youth, with immigration, immigrants to our community, that sort of thing. I would assume that these grants were being used to make positive steps forward, assist these various groups in our community.
Thank you. Through the chair, absolutely. The investments that were recently announced are part of the region's equity investment fund and are designed to meet community needs through all kinds of engagement. And you're absolutely right, through many of the things that we've identified in the engagement presentation today.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor McCabe?
Thank you very much. Through you, Chair. I was also wondering a question for, is it Deb Berge? Just with the question, the same question that or the line that Councillor Deutschmann identified, was there a distinction in that question about like actually what services they're talking about? Like I'm wondering, like people often get, they don't distinguish between city services, regional services, like are they talking about, like, are they thinking transit? Are they, like, what kind of services are they actually, like, do you itemize those things, or what are they actually responding to?
So through the chair, I think, so that question was asked as it's stated there on the slide, but we do have some other questions that asked about specific services that were more important and priority. So in the January report, when we're able to get the full results for you, we will be able to dig more into specific services that mattered more or prioritized higher, and those some of those distinctions. We have a number of open-ended questions we'll be able to dig into, and specifically related to that capital question as well. We may find some comments that alluded to that. So I think you'll see a lot richer analysis come out in January that may be able to answer some more of those questions. So there will be other opportunities to sort of flesh out and add a lot more context than this very simple slide.
Okay, thank you, because my mind was going similar to where Councillor Deutschmann was, like, if we have to make decisions about where trade-offs are going to be, it would be really helpful to have a better sense of what they're actually, where citizens or residents' heads at. And just a question, I should have written down what slide it's on, but on the one with all the, the percentages about belonging and strong sense of belonging and how many felt isolated, there was one that said 71% of people had a strong sense of belonging, but 76% felt isolated. Am I mixing up the youth and adults?
Through the chair, that's in the immigration partnership data.
Yeah.
So I might turn to Tara Bedard to answer that question.
Sorry, I'll have to learn to make
It's on slide 18.
So I was just wondering how you interpret that.
Sorry, I apologize for that. I think it's complicated how we feel as people, where we are at, and we ask a number of different questions that kind of get at similar but different ways of interpreting how people feel in this community, in order to understand, the complex emotions that people feel about living here. So when we ask people about their sense of belonging, we hear overwhelmingly, lots of people do feel a strong sense of belonging when they come to this community who are immigrants, and at the same time they feel isolated. This survey was conducted in the context of the pandemic, so there had been some increases in the response rates for sense of isolation, but they were also, higher than we would like to see prior to the beginning of the pandemic as well. So I think, people can feel isolated in this community and at the same time feel a sense of belonging because of the little bits of things that they do have around them that they cling to while they're here. There's a lot that we should be digging into beneath some of these higher level numbers, but I think this is just a really reflection that, we are complex beings and our feelings and emotions don't always make sense when we look at them kind of side by side.
Thank you.
Councillor Shantz.
My questions were identical to Councillor McCabe's, so thank you.
Okay. Councillor Huenick.
Through you, Chair Harris, with respect to the same slide that Councillor McCabe was just referring to, I'm wondering if there's any comparison data in terms of the sense of belonging, the employment, the housing, etc., because I'm wondering if there are additional factors other than being a newcomer to Canada or recently immigrating.
Through the chair, yes, there's a lot of comparable data for the community overall. We were trying to bring forward today what we learn from immigrants when we go out and do our engagement in the region, because we're hearing from people who are typically not well represented in other engagement efforts. So we are able to compare kind of the data that we see in the engagement that we do with immigrants to how others in the community are feeling, in order for us to be able to look at, what are those differences of experiences for different groups of people overall across the community, and see where, priority might be needed in terms of investments and resources and energies.
Thank you. So through the chair, again, just a quick follow-up question. Are you able to speak to whether the data is similar in terms of a sense of belonging, a sense of employment, a sense of housing, et cetera? Is it similar for non-newcomers and newcomers?
Across all of those areas, I think we see some similarities and we see some differences. I would not like to misspeak today, but I would be happy to bring back that data for you at a later time to share where we do see, the differences of the experiences.
That would be great. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Just to add to that, we currently have the Wellbeing Waterloo Region survey, which is out, which will give us disaggregated data on those questions, just as you're asking. That'll come, I think, early in the new year.
Councillor Salonen.
Thank you very much. Through you, Chair. Just wondering, do we have like a general threshold of what we deem successful for community engagement? I know that you said that we've done lots of great things to advertise, but looking at 1,000 people responding roughly in the phone survey for an area of 500,000 more residents, I'm just wondering if we have a baseline threshold on what we deem successful.
Thanks. Through the chair, I might take that one, Deb. I think, we're always looking at different ways to improve upon engagement. We have seen a steady increase in participation over the past number of years. But I think we're also finding that traditional methods of engagement aren't surfacing all the voices we want to hear from. And I think to the presentation that Paula and Fazia made, we're trying to have more ongoing conversations in different ways. And I think success of community engagement is on how residents feel about their voices being heard. And that's some of the resident experience survey results that'll come in the new year around how do residents actually feel about the conversations they're having with the region, and what can we do to better engage them and elevate their voices.
Councillor McCabe.
Through you, Chair. I think this might be directed to, sorry, is it Janice Smith? Sorry, Jenny Smith, sorry. Just wondering in the community engagement that you've done and the questions that were asked as well through the surveys, where the arts and culture piece comes into it, because my understanding is like arts and culture does bring a lot of sense of belonging to people, and as well as adds, through economic development lens, adds a lot of vibrancy and is a huge part of talent attraction. So just, I know there maybe it's going to be more in the deeper dive that you do in January, but where that piece, because I think that's a really important piece that I'm hoping has been included in this, because it's a pretty significant sector.
Absolutely, through the chair. It is an incredibly significant component of our community life and quality of life. In terms of the survey, we actually, one of the charts that you saw, which spoke to the things that were most important to people, they were actually open-ended questions. So we hope to bring forward more information to you in the new year about where those parts that you're speaking to have popped up. And obviously there are other sources of data that we can go to, and we are very happy to go to our colleagues in Rodriguez area to start to surface some of that and bring it back to you as well.
That's all. Any questions we have? So carry on.
Great, thank you. So building on the process and work of staff to date and considering the wealth of information that's been gathered through engagement, the next portion of our presentation is an overview of the draft plan for 2023 that identifies the key objectives in each of our strategic focus areas, shares a bit of the strategic context that staff have considered in building the draft plan for next year, and the draft initiatives that are designed to deliver on the strategic plan and meet the needs of residents. Members of our corporate leadership team will present, and we're going to pause after each strategic focus area for dialogue. Our hope for today is to get feedback and input as we work to finalize the plan in the new year. A few questions for you to keep in mind. Does the plan reflect the most important priorities? How have community needs changed over the past year, and does the plan reflect this? Or what opportunities or challenges do you see from a resourcing perspective, knowing that we'll get into the actual specific financial detail in future meetings? With that, I'll turn it over to our Commissioner of Planning, Development and Legislative Services, Rod Regier, to kick us off with Thriving Economy.
Thank you very much, Ms. McDonald. I'm Rod Regier, the Commissioner of Planning, Development and Legislative Services. I'll be opening up this conversation with a high-level overview of how our draft plan responds to the strategic focus area of a thriving economy. Next slide. So this particular area of focus right now includes the following strategic objectives: creating a competitive, business-supportive community that attracts, retains, and grows employers, talent, and investments in the Waterloo region; ensuring an adequate supply of employment lands for the region. We had an extensive conversation about that through the regional official plan review process that we went through over the last couple of years. Supporting the arts, culture, and heritage sectors to enrich the lives of residents and attract visitors to the region, as was raised by Councillor McCabe. Growing passenger air service and aviation-related activities at the region of Waterloo International Airport. And this is something that we've done a lot of work on and have had some significant success I'll address later on. Next slide, please. So, the last year, of course, has been, last several years have been tumultuous for our economy. The big story here has been one of challenge and resilience. The pandemic has impacted our economy considerably, leading to global instability that we are feeling on our very own doorstep. This is also a story that is familiar to many. Wages are up due to inflation and pressures in the labor market. Unemployment is low, and GDP growth is beginning to slow, paradoxically. Public debt is high. The debt to GDP ratio is high. All of this puts pressure on supply chains, business operations, and consumer spending. The rise in the digital transformation and the shift to hybrid and remote working has altered the structure of our economy and changed the way our cities work. There have been many benefits to this shift, but we are still learning how to adapt and how this has impacted our ability to attract and retain talent in the Waterloo region. Despite these challenges, our local economy is resilient, innovative, and supported by a network of businesses, business support agency, and partnerships across all levels of government and sectors. They have all agreed on one thing, and that is the need to work differently and to work together as we leverage our collective assets as a community. We will continue to leverage those assets to rebuild and grow our economy in the years ahead. Many of these assets have a global relevance, and we are very excited about our future. One key asset is our reputation as an innovative region with a good quality of life, something that people around the world identify. We want to convey what we offer as a community and how all of this helps us to attract and retain talent, a critical and pressing issue that we continue to need to solve. Having enough affordable housing is part of part of the solution to that challenge, And the regional official plan, which we've just been working on, includes the addition of 121,000 housing units over the next 30 years that support a range of and mix of housing and the development of 15-minute neighborhoods in all cities and townships. All of these elements are fundamental to our success in this part of our corporate strategic plan. Next slide, please. So in terms of 2023, here are some highlights. Aligning with our collective goals as community has never been more important. Industry is asking for help with this, and we are working with municipal partners, academic institutions, and others on a new strategy to align our goals and resources to support an ecosystem that leverages our academic institutions, immigration, and other opportunities. Another asset to leverage is our infrastructure and employment lands. Getting these investment and shovel-ready lands ready for industry will bring high-quality jobs. This remains a priority for us. In the last amendment to the regional official plan, we identified 456 hectares of new employment lands that will be needed through the ROP to support additional employment in the Waterloo region over the next 30 years. We know that these employment lands will support the growth of our industrial economy that provides currently about 60,000 manufacturing jobs in the Waterloo region and remains a vital component of our regional economy. Aligning other key infrastructure, such as transit and housing, will be required to realize the full potential in economic growth and quality of life for people employed in the Waterloo region. Another recent success story, and one that we continue to build on, has been our regional international airport, YKF. In 2017, the region adopted a new airport master plan and business plan focused on ultra-low-cost air carriers and aerospace industries. We've invested in the airport, and as a result, we continue to see passengers respond to our investments and new airline services. Numbers are up, jobs are up, and our connections to the rest of the world are opening up. We currently service 15 destinations out of our international airport. In 2021, a total of 133,293 aircraft movements were recorded at the region of Waterloo International Airport, which represents a 245% increase over 2019. Our airport is the fastest growing airport in Canada right now, in large part due to our strategic partnership with Flair Airlines. Not only do we now have convenient air travel options, we are supporting aviation, economic activity, and enhancing the aerospace ecosystem in our community. We also have formed a partnership with the Waterloo Institute for Sustainable Aeronautics at the University of Waterloo. This has led to the introduction of, for example, our first electric training aircraft at Waterloo Wellington Flight Center. And we expect many additional innovations with that partnership. Work and investment will be ongoing in 2023 to continue to build on this success. And finally, because cultural services is part of the department that I'm responsible for, I want to talk about our cultural institutions and how important they are to telling our story and building the quality of life, a quality of life where everyone thrives in the Waterloo region. Over the past year, we've also made inroads into reimagining our libraries, museums, and cultural services, fostering digital technologies to improve how these work for residents in the Waterloo region, and we'll continue this work through 2023. And I've been here many times to talk about the ongoing challenging conversations that we're having as a community about who we are. The lens that we are bringing to this conversation is a serious commitment to reconciliation and an acknowledgement that our history didn't start in the early 1800s. It started over 12,000 years ago with First Nations peoples moving to the area after the glaciers receded from the Waterloo region. Moving forward on the journey towards reconciliation and partnership with First Nations goes hand in hand with this focus on a thriving economy. I think we can take questions and discussion here.
Any questions for Commissioner? Oh, we got someone. Councillor Foxton.
Thank you, and through the chair. Rod, I was at the Waterloo Economic Development meeting they hosted last Thursday, and they brought in a gentleman who spends his life going and selecting sites for companies to move to, and that's his job across the world. And he has a list priority, and one of the top things that eliminates municipality from being selected for a business to come to them is infrastructure. If it's not already readily available in the land, they do not come. Tony Lament also talked about the decrease in manufacturing in our area lately, and I'm wondering if the two are connected, but are we working towards, because we've mentioned it many times, are we working towards supplying infrastructure for our lands that we want to businesses to?
Through you, Chair Harris. Yes, certainly. Thank you for the question, Councillor Foxton. This is a significant area of interest for us and in our strategic plan. As I was mentioning, the Regional Official Plan has allocated an additional 456 hectares of employment lands for future industrial development. We're seeing some very significant investments in additional employment lands, both in all three cities actually, and somewhat in the townships as well. For example, we have the city of Waterloo opening up a new industrial park in the northern part of the city. We have additional redevelopment of employment lands on Homer Watson Boulevard in the city of Kitchener, and we have additional large-scale industrial lands under development in the city of Cambridge. So I would say right now we have approximately 1,100 hectares of employment lands available for development in the Waterloo region. There are some gaps in the market. We've had some requests for very large parcels of land, which we are studying the potential to address. But certainly we see a lot of active investment in industrial infrastructure and employment lands in the region of Waterloo right now.
Through the chair, for clarification, please. When you stated employment lands, do they have the necessary water sewer infrastructure to move ahead? Are they business ready?
Well, certainly the parcels that I identified in the industrial parks in North Waterloo and on Homer Watson in Kitchener, on Shirley Avenue in Kitchener, in northern Cambridge, the Intermarket development and the Hoop development are all fully serviced, and if you drove past those areas right now, you'd see a significant amount of investment underway.
I just wanted to make sure because it looked like that's where we were losing ground. Thank you.
Mr. Lochner.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. We're also bringing a report to Council. I believe that's early in the new year.
Yep.
And currently we're looking at how much it's going to cost to look at some of these things like mega site development. And again, when we talk about budget and capital pressures, that again will be a significant choice that Council will have to make, as there are many things competing with those dollars, mega sites and development of land, as Councillor Foxton has said, being one of them.
Councillor Deutschman.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Harris, through you, and I'll figure out the e-scribe thing too. Thanks for pointing that out to me. I just want to follow up on what Councillor Foxton has said, because she raises a significant point, and this is a crisis in our community right now. Tony Lamantia and the Waterloo Region Economic Development Corporation will tell you that. Right now, the city of Woodstock is out there advertising in all of the major publications on site selection in the United States about inviting companies to come to them. Site selectors will tell us that the region of Waterloo gets a D+ for what we have available. We have a crisis in available lands, and we have to move fast to get shovel-ready lands available. But I'm just wondering, does Bill 23 have any impact on our ability to develop shovel-ready lands in this community? I have a follow-up question.
Through you, Chair Harris. I think we've met extensively with the site selectors that have been working with WEDC and the province on some of these issues, and we actually get really strong positive reviews in certain classes of investment, which would particularly be with medium to large-scale employment land requirements. So what the site selectors call singles, doubles, and triples. The mega sites are challenged because, just for everybody's information, the Toyota plant currently occupies about 400 acres. That would be considered to be a mega site in current considerations. So, excuse me, I forgot the second part of your question. Oh, Bill 23, yes.
Bill 23.
Yeah, Bill 23 won't have any effect on our potential for planning additional employment lands and servicing them. The distribution or construction of services to new employment lands is largely a matter of responsibility of the area municipalities. The region of Waterloo would be responsible for the provision of for example, the production of water and the dealing with wastewater. But the localized infrastructure is the responsibility of area municipalities and developers. And in addition, we don't see any. I wouldn't, and I'm thinking off the top of my head here to some extent. I wouldn't see any impact on our role in, for example, continuing to build employment lands in and around the airport, for example.
Mr. Chair Harris, through you, if I could continue.
Yeah, follow up.
So thank you, Mr. Revere, for clarifying that. So we do have a significant problem on the mega site part of it. And I think it'd be helpful for council to have Tony Lamantia come in and do a presentation for us on this very significant issue. And again, Councillor Foxon has raised a concern, and it's a real concern. Think about where our community would be if we didn't have Toyota in this area. And think about the electric vehicle revolution that's going on right now, and how can we as a community participate in that, and what do we have to offer with respect to that? And I think those are some real concerns that we have. So hopefully that'll be resolved. On the first part, or the second dot of your strategic initiatives, it says develop a new land portfolio and site readiness process to expedite, which I think is crucial. But then again, has Bill 23 affected our ability to participate in that with the area municipalities and I'm presuming this would be in conjunction with area municipalities to come up with a process that expedites lands for affordable housing. And so first off, is that with the area municipalities? And second, how is that impacted by Bill 23?
Yeah, thank you. Through you, Chair Harris. Thank you. It's an excellent question, and a really important really important issue. All of our work in economic development happens hand in glove with the area municipalities and our business stakeholders, such as WEDC, Waterloo Economic Development Corporation. I don't actually think that Bill 23 affects us in any material way. It's certainly an important matter for us to address. Our economic development team, led by Matthew Chandy, has got two studies underway right now. One is to deal with the megasite, the challenge of building a megasite in the Waterloo region, and the second one is to look at our approach to the development of shovel-ready lands for employment. And so these pieces of work will be brought forward to council early in the new year. Some of them are unfolding very quickly right now, and so council will have additional information on these two to inform the 2023 strategy very shortly.
There are no further questions at this time.
Great, we'll move to our next strategic focus area, and Jennifer Rose. Thank you. Thank you, councillors and chair. Oh my goodness. I'm Jennifer Rose, Commissioner for Engineering and Environmental Services, and I'll be speaking to the Environment and Climate Action Focus Area. Next slide, please. So the strategic objectives for this focus area include reducing our greenhouse gas emissions, improving resiliency to climate change and severe weather, diverting more waste away from landfill, protecting our water resources, and promoting the efficient use of urban land, and protect and enhance agricultural and natural areas. Next slide, please. The climate crisis is accelerating, and protecting the environment has never been more important than it is now. The changing climate impacts not only how we build and protect our infrastructure, but also private and public property and protecting vulnerable populations. The starting point for much of this has been the regional official plan. Our population growth continues to be one of the highest in the country and in North America. Over the coming years, it will be important to manage that growth in a way that supports the sustainability of our natural environment and critical agricultural lands. In the regional official plan, for instance, there is protection of the regional recharge area, which protects a natural recharge of the groundwater the region uses for most of its drinking water by allowing the rain and snow to make its way to the aquifers. The way we build our community and operate as an organization to support these aspirations to be a thriving, climate-conscious, healthy and safe municipality is key to reaching our target to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 80% by 2050. Our goal of 15-minute communities are about climate action as much as they are about social cohesion, vibrancy, and quality of life. And how we protect our natural environment is of profound importance. Protecting wetlands and surface water, woodlands and groundwater, and incorporating carbon reductions are part of the work we do as a corporation every day when we work on our master plans, detailed design of our projects, and our many programs. For example, the region's wastewater system and landfill captures methane to support energy needs. At the curb, we are seeing a 63% diversion rate as residents embrace separating their waste into the 3 streams. Protecting and stewarding the region's natural environment and land is part of our efforts of reconciliation. The region is starting to build a more detailed picture of Indigenous history through a number of important archaeological digs underway, and the partnership with First Nations is transforming how we think about our region. There are sites in the region that are thousands of years old that teach us about cultural management of natural resources in the region of Waterloo. Next slide, please. So some strategic initiatives for 2023 associated with this focus area. In my area to start, so our water and wastewater assets are valued at $2.353 billion in our last asset management plan. All of these assets need to be operated, maintained, repaired, and replaced. The Water and Wastewater Services Division supplied, treated, and distributed 56 million cubic meters of water and treated 57 million cubic meters of wastewater. The water supply strategy supports the region's plans for growth by considering resident and business water supply needs to 2051, which includes new infrastructure and increased capacity in existing infrastructure. The strategy not only looks at new supply to support future growth, but will consider new and modern conservation programs, which are all vital to this focus area. It will be optimizing the existing facilities and maximizing production while reducing reliance on energy. The SCADA and Operating Technology Transformation Project is replacing infrastructure with state-of-the-art systems to increase system resilience, improve data management and operations, and to strengthen protections from a cybersecurity event. Managing the Blue Box transition legislation changes is something we also have within the plan. This new provincial model moves recycling to full producer responsibility by March 2024, which means that the region will no longer be responsible for recycling after transition. And after transition, the region will no longer receive this funding and revenue. The producers currently fund approximately 50% of our Blue Box program,
which is approximately $4 million a year, and the region sells 90% of the items which residents put in the blue box, resulting in a revenue of approximately $3 million per year. Continuing in year 2 of the electric bus pilot is an exciting part of our plan. This initiative will, along with others, ease us on the path to a zero-emission transit system. And these actions help contribute to implementing Transform WR, a 10-year partnership plan to reduce our carbon footprint by 80% by 2050. And this is an initiative we are proud to be part of. The Environment and Climate Action Focus Area is one which influences and provides strategic direction to all the work the region does, and we are happy to answer any questions you may have with respect to this work. Thank you.
Any questions? Seeing none, we'll move on. Oh, sorry. I don't have Councillor Deutschmann. I see you waving up there, so.
Sorry about that. I thought I clicked on the request to speak.
I don't have you in here, but that's right. I saw you, so it's all good.
All right. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I have a question with respect to maybe it's not the appropriate time, but on Transform WR and the targets. And my question is this, we have specific targets that, 30% by 2030, 80% by 2050. Is there any way of measuring where we are today and measuring that every year so that at the end of our term, we're able to point to what contribution we made as a council towards achieving those targets? Thank you.
Through you, Councillor, or Chair Harris, I can respond to that.
Sure.
We have a team led by Kate Hagerman, who's our manager of environmental planning and sustainability. They are in the process of developing a carbon budget for the Waterloo region. We've done a fair amount of emissions tracking for both the organization and the region as a whole, but we are in the process of refining the models that we're using, and we'll be bringing that information back to Council on an ongoing basis moving forward.
Mr. Chair, if I could, just one more.
Sure, follow up.
So first, I apologize. I don't know who that was. And second, does that mean we will get a number where we're at today and we will get a number where we're at in 4 years? Just simply a yes or no to that?
Yes. This is Rod Regier, Commissioner.
Oh, Rod.
Development.
There you go. I didn't recognize you on my small screen. Sorry.
I apologize for that. I should have identified myself. Yes. We actually have been producing annual reports on this, and so what I can do is send you the most recent annual reports. We'll send them to all of Council as background, and then we will be bringing forward annual reports on your quest to address your question moving forward.
Thank you,
Councillor James.
Thank you, through you, Chair Harris. Question regarding, just for clarification, I guess, the blue box transition. Now, what's the year that is going to be transitioning out?
Starting.
So through the chair, that transition is March of 2024 for the region of Waterloo.
Oh, okay. And just to follow up to that, in terms of the funding, how much of that funding will be lost, or how much is it now, and the impacts potentially to future budget process?
So through the chair, that's a really good question. Right now, the producers fund 50% of everything to do with recycling. So that's picking it up at the curb, processing it, promotion and education around it. Once the producers take on that responsibility, that full producer responsibility, the region will no longer be in the business of recycling, so they will no longer receive that grant funding. And we also will not have the recyclables that we collect at the curb to sell. And those are two significant revenue sources for our waste program. But on the other hand, we will not be picking up recycling anymore. So we do see some cost savings as part of this of this transition. We just are not, we're still working through the process. We're watching actually to see what other municipalities are doing who are transitioning earlier in 2023 to see what the actual impact and reality of producer responsibility actually means. And we're going to come back to Council in the Q1 of 2023 with a more comprehensive report on Blue Box to give you a better understanding of how that program is going to work for Waterloo Region.
Perfect. Thank you.
Councillor Huonick.
Hi, through you, Chair Harris. You might have just answered my question, but I'll put it out there anyway, just in case there's more info regarding this. When the responsibility for recycling shifts, what accountability measures do we have, if any, in place to ensure that the recycling is to the same standard that the region currently practices?
So through the chair to the councillor, that is actually one of the questions we're working with the producers in the province to understand, because inevitably some recycling material does end up in the waste stream, in the residual waste, we call it, in your garbage bags at the curb. So we're trying to understand what that means from a municipality perspective. So we're glad actually that we're going in 2024 and not 2023, because as I mentioned before, we will be able to watch and see what happens with other municipalities with respect to how the transition happens. The producers have said that they expect no changes really for the resident experience. But we do feel that we will still get calls about recycling because people are used to the municipality being in charge of recycling, and we'll just have to manage that as we go through the transition. Fortunately, there are examples in Canada, BC in particular, where they have gone through producer responsibility transition, and we are learning a lot from our colleagues out in BC.
Great, thank you very much.
Councillor Erb.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just following up on the recycling. So the collection at the curb, is that funded 50-50 as well by the municipality and the province, or do we pick up the tab on that?
So through the chair to Councillor Erb, the funding we get for the collection at the curb is approximately 50% funded by the producers, not the province. It's the producers themselves.
It's the producers, and we do the other 50%.
That's correct.
Okay. So in future, that contract would be let by the producers, or they would be the contractor?
Yeah. So through the chair, that is one of the ways that the recycling can be picked up, is the contractor themselves would put out an RFP for a contractor to pick up that recycling. They've also put out information to allow municipalities to bid on that contract as well, or use our existing contractor to pick up recycling at the curb, and that those details of what we're planning on doing is going to be part of the report that we bring back in Q1 of 2023.
Okay. Probably getting too deep into the weeds today, but thank you.
Councillor Deutschmann, do I have you on here again, or?
Thank you, Councillor or Chair Harris. I was just checking to make sure I could do the thing correctly, so I'm good.
Okay. Seeing no other questions, we'll move
I have
on.
a question.
Oh,
I'm having,
sorry, Councillor McCabe.
Yeah, thanks. I'm having a problem with my.
All right, we got you there now.
But that wasn't my question. But
Hands are good too.
I don't know if this is the right time to ask this, but I'll ask it because I'm new and I'm will beg your forgiveness. But when you're talking about achieving these big climate reduction or carbon reduction targets that we've set for ourselves, and I'm totally all for doing that, and I'm wondering if staff is thinking about or contemplating something kind of very transformational particularly around the transportation side of the equation. I mean, I know you've got the electric bus pilot happening, but if there's the potential to think about things like, reducing fares for certain, or reducing or eliminating fares to really strongly encourage people to more strongly uptake transit as their primary source of moving around our community.
Through the chair and to Councillor McCabe, I think so there are a number of electrification of buses is transformational. It is a revolution in the way that we operate services, so we're on the road to do that. I'll talk a little bit more in the sustainable transportation focus areas on what also needs to be done on the active transportation, because that's the real, if we compare it to most I'd say the world-class cities that are doing their best. It's really on the active transportation that there's an even bigger gap, I would say, than transit. But there are definitely a number of initiatives, and I think when they're brought together, they do amount to some transformational changes in the region. And it's a lot of coordination between the planning efforts, the transportation efforts, the development piece. I mean, there's a lot of pieces. I think that's the strength of the Transform Waterloo Region plan, is really to bring all the pieces together, because individually they don't bring that level of transformation that's required to meet these very ambitious targets.
Mr. Regier?
If I may, Chair Harris, I'd just like to add that we had a very important conversation with the community over the last 2 years about the role of land use planning in transforming the carbon requirements of our economy. And we talked about, for example, the concepts of 15-minute neighborhoods, 15-minute communities, building transit supportive development, intensification rather than expansion into greenfield areas and so on, and building and making sure that communities that we do build in greenfield areas are transit supportive from the outset. So I think those are actually quite radical. Also intensification, right through our urban system, particularly on arterial roads that are already well serviced by transit. So this is probably the most important thing you can do to transform the way that we use energy in the region of Waterloo, is through a fresh and efficient approach to land use planning.
Just to follow up, thanks very much for those responses. And to my council colleagues, I know we're facing a really tough budget, as was stated at the outset. So I just think this is something, though, that if we really do want to achieve those big targets and do something, really provide some, I think we need to really think about some critical transformational type of proposals or programs. If not for this year, at least certainly in our term, that I'll just put that on the table. So, thank you for your indulgence.
Thank you, Councillor. Moving on.
Yes, we'll move to healthy, safe, and inclusive communities, and to Dr. Wong.
Thank you, Connie. Good afternoon, Council. I'm Shuli Wong. I'm the Commissioner and Medical Officer of Health for Public Health and Emergency Services. And I will start us off on the next strategic focus area, healthy, safe, and inclusive communities. Next slide, please. So this is another major strategic focus area and represents a broad portfolio of initiatives and partnerships. The strategic focus area objectives include improving child and youth well-being, making affordable housing available, a need that we see escalating in the current context. This is also an area where equity must be embedded in all that we do and at the heart of the decisions that we make. There will be an ongoing focus on mental health and addictions, as well as an emphasis on safety and well-being as a community in all its forms, from systems change and upstream prevention to road safety. Next slide, please. Key considerations for this strategic focus area. Across the world, the impacts of COVID-19 are still being felt in almost all areas of our lives. Although we have much to be proud of in terms of our community's response to the pandemic to date, we must also recognize that we will need to continue supporting our community in many other ways. The cost of living and affordability is ever present, and we are experiencing significant housing and homelessness challenges. Many residents are also struggling with mental health and addictions. We can all relate in some way to these human stories and challenges. I'm now going to hand it off to my colleague, Peter Sweeney, Commissioner of Community Services, to carry on with our context and plan in this focus area. Thank you.
Thanks, Julie. And so, building off what you just heard, what does that actually look like in this community? And I would say it's a community that is in a mode of recovery. It is a community that not everyone who lives here and calls this place home is on the same stage of recovery. We see levels of inequity across this community, and we see it every single day. And as your regional government, we interact with all walks of life. We interact with folks who are not always well served by market forces. Last month alone, 15,000 people in this community were subsiding by government assistance through Ontario Works or ODSP on rates that in both cases are well below not just the poverty line, but the deep poverty line. We have a wait list for community housing in this community that exceeds 7,000 families, 7,000 individuals. My colleague Julie referred to the impacts of the pandemic, mental health and addictions, income equality, food security are all pressures that we are facing. These are exacerbated by high levels of inflation that we've heard. This is not an academic or even a math exercise on so many levels. This is a human exercise. One of the things that we are recognizing is there are challenges with some of the work that we do in this key focus area are multifactorial and cross jurisdictions. You heard Bruce refer to the elimination of the SSRF, which my colleague Craig Dyer will enumerate for you later, but this has a significant impact on the work that we're trying to do. So how are we going to tackle this? If I could ask for the next slide to be put up. We have a number of key strategic initiatives, and the work that we have to do has to look at how do we support people in this community who need it now, and how do we also plan for the future and ensure that we're transitioning. An example of that is the work that we're doing on the homelessness file, where we have asked and sought and received council's approval for a significant investment in an interim housing plan, in addition to the work that will commence shortly to develop a multi-year plan that will have as its goal to end chronic homelessness in this community. That's the type of work we have to do across this community. There are a number of initiatives that we are looking at. You can see them on your screen there today. I won't go through all of them other than to say we are doing our level best to ensure that we identify the resources that are going to be required to invest in the health and the recovery of this community at all levels, especially for those who need a bit of extra support. We're also an organization that, although I'm new here, I do believe, and I've seen it on a day-to-day basis, that is full of dedicated, hardworking individuals who at the end of the day believe very strongly that civil service can be a force for good. Thank you. Happy to take any questions or defer to my colleague Julie.
Any questions? Oh, Councillor Deutschman.
Thank you, Chair Harris. Just a couple through you to Dr. Wang. Dr. Wang, what is the current view on masking in our community?
Through you, the chair, given the presence of multiple respiratory viruses such as COVID-19, respiratory syncytial virus, also known as RSV, and influenza that's circulating in our community as well as in Ontario and even nationally, the current recommendation is for people to mask in indoor settings.
Okay, thank you. A second question through you, Chair Harris.
Yeah, if we can keep it focused to the presentation, that'd be good. That'd be ideal.
Yeah, I just wanted to say to Commissioner Sweeney, I'm glad to hear about the goal of ending chronic homelessness. It brings to mind the great advocate, a loss to our community with her passing, Lynn McCauley, who was one of the strongest advocates and people advocating to try to resolve chronic homelessness. And I just want to say that, you know, we often talk about a capital infrastructure deficit in our community. We have as great a deficit in social services as we do in capital infrastructure. And that's something that we're really going to have to focus on when we're talking about, and again, I get back to my point earlier, it's not just a matter of services versus services, it's services and capital infrastructure investments. And we have to take a look at trade-offs everywhere to see what we can do to advance for the best in our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Craig.
I just want to follow up on a couple of things that are being said, and I have not read the documents from the past council with regards to eliminating homelessness, and I've asked for them. But we, from my perspective out in the community, in the Cambridge community, we certainly have a crisis when it comes to addiction and when it comes to homelessness. I don't think that the regional taxpayer can afford to solve these issues. And is there not any other way that we can approach both the province and the feds with regards to getting them to take ownership for these problems? From my perspective, they're not. And we need to get them in here with us, sitting down and taking ownership, because we don't have the monies, nor do we have the legislation, in my opinion, to solve these issues. And we certainly need it. Just your thoughts quickly.
Certainly. Thank you, Councillor Craig. The reference to the plan to end chronic homelessness in this community is a reference to an approval that we received from the previous council to undertake that work in 2023. And as part of the interim housing plan is designed to get us there. So I just want to clarify that. So that work is going to be undertaken in 2023. To your point, while the planning for that work is still in its infancy, I would concur that the only way for us to tackle this as a community is as a community. It is not a challenge that we are going to solve as one level of government or just as one level of organization. Civil society is not going to solve it on its own. And so the intent behind the design of that would be an all of community engagement and all of community response that looks laterally across, because you're absolutely right. And, you know, I've spent time talking to people with lived experience, current lived experience, and you can't, in my experience and talking to people who know this work better than I do, you can't divorce the issue of homelessness, chronic homelessness, from that of mental health addictions, childhood trauma. You know, we talk about the social determinants of health guiding our work. This is a real example where this has to inform that completely.
I guess if I may, Mr. Chair, just to follow up, I'm wondering, and I'm just throwing this out, if we can have an update in terms of information with regards to the number of people. I know there was a report in 2018 to support the safe injection site on Duke Street, and they outlined in there the number of people, an estimate, who were taking drugs every day, and it was 2,000. And I'm wondering if we can get an update on that. And at that point, they said it was an underestimation in 2018. So I think we need to have a comprehensive kind of a description of just what the problems are, and you know, in terms of things like mental health, with regards to, do we have enough capacity to help the people we need? And I think these are the issues. We need to have a picture of what Waterloo region looks like today in terms of needs, and before we can go to the province and feds and say, look, we need your help and you need to be part of it. So I'm just asking if we can get an update. That's what I'm asking.
Certainly.
Over to Mr. Walker.
Do you want to address that specifically, or?
Yeah, a couple of things. We will be bringing that information back, so we'll start to touch on that today to Councillor Craig's question about how much, I don't want to reword what you said, how much from our levy goes towards things that we would prefer to be funded by and probably should be funded by the federal or provincial government. So we'll be very specific on that when it comes to housing and homelessness. And I know that Peter's team and Shirley's team are working on data with Ontario Health along the lines of what you're asking for. I'm not sure if it's exactly, but we'll take that back. Any of these requests that we get today, we will bring back responses to future meetings before the budget process is completed.
I have Councillor Verbanovic, Herb, and then I see Councillor Wolf. Are you going to ask a question as well? I'll come back to, well, I'm going to go to Councillor Verbanovic, then Herb, and then yourself, if you don't mind.
I just had a comment about what Doug Craig just said.
All right, well, we'll come back if you don't mind. Councillor Verbanovic.
Thank you very much, Chair Harris, and really thank you, Mr. Sweeney, for the update on the work that you and your team have been doing, even before they were your team, quite frankly. But in particular, the work that's been done since the motion in earlier this year that looked for the overall work plan on the homelessness strategy and the work that you've been doing with partners to really address this the growing numbers that we've seen and the urgent nature of it. I'm encouraged to hear some of the desire by our colleagues to continue with the advocacy with provincial and federal governments on this. We know that is an issue. We're still waiting, and I know it'll be a topic on our Ontario Big City Mayor's agenda on Friday. The request from earlier this year, the unanimous request to meet with the Premier to discuss the issue of mental health addictions and homelessness that came from that caucus. And I know that Chair Redmond, in her capacity as chair of the regional chairs and single tier municipalities group, was part of that as well. And so that advocacy and concern continues. There's no question that there needs to be more investment happening in that regard, and it's something that I think we're all going to need to focus our advocacy efforts on even more than before, because as has been identified, our property tax system is not designed to carry the extent of the financial burden that goes with this, and we really need those other orders of government to step up. Thank you.
Okay, just a reminder, we're asking questions of staff on particular presentations. So, Councillor Herb.
So you don't want my comments?
Hopefully, there's a question in there.
What a question. Well, I'm going to, on the advocacy issue to the province and the federal government, it has not been for a lack of trying in this last year that we have sent more resolutions asking for funding for a partnership. And unfortunately, it's falling on deaf ears, and that's exactly the reason why we had to put a 1% levy on the property tax base in 2022. Half of it, I think Mr. Dyer can help me, or Cheryl, half of it went to build affordable housing, and the other half was to deal with the homelessness and housing issue in the shelter system. And so we have tried. It's falling on deaf ears. And the more people we can get to help us advocate, the better, because we can't do this on the back of on the property tax base. Would you like me to ask a question?
If you're good, you're good. Councillor Wolf.
Through Mr. Chair, I guess I will phrase mine as a question. Do we need more data before we go to the province and the feds to ask for the money that we need? And if I'm answering my own question, I'd say if we have a waiting list of 7,000, even if that's out of date, all the facts and figures that we do know, everything is increasing. So I wouldn't think it's wise to spend more staff time and money on getting facts and figures to go to a province that so far has been deaf to our demands. And I think we need to just look at action, and we don't need many more studies. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see any more questions. We'll move on to Matthew.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. So through you, my name is Matthew Getsky. I'm the Commissioner for Transportation Services, and I'll walk you through the sustainable transportation part of the plan. Next slide, please. So the strategic objectives, I'll give you a quick overview. So this focus area covers all modes and all ways to help people get around the community, with an emphasis on affordability and sustainability. So you'll see references to 15-minute neighborhoods that both Rod and Jennifer mentioned. I'll talk about bus electrification also. So you'll see objective number 1, the first bullet there, is really related to transit. It focuses on customer experience. And if you unpack the strategic plan, there are actions related to the preparation of ION Stage 2, a word on fare structures and thinking about fare structures, and GRT service planning and recovery. Objective number 2 deals with the integration with broader transportation networks, in particular with the rail system, which connects us to the GTA as well as nearby cities, and the hubs that support that, in particular the King Victoria Transit Hub. Objective number 3 emphasizes active transportation with its various benefits to health and to the community, and that covers a number of pedestrian and cycling facilities as well as services. And the objective number 4 really highlights our attention to safety for all users of the transportation system, which requires a wide range of interventions that can go from road, intersection design, education, winter maintenance, so both kind of hard and soft measures. Next slide, please. So in terms of some background considerations for this plan and budget cycle, the first one is really related to that 15-minute neighborhood lens that we're bringing on everything that we do. So the idea is to make it easy for people to walk, cycle, move around to meet their daily needs within a constrained, within a limited catchment area. There's a big planning component to this through intensification and mixed use that Rod mentioned earlier. And there is a mobility component, which is about interconnecting the pedestrian and the cycling networks and serving the neighborhoods with transit so you can move from one to another, and offering flexible mobility choices that don't require using a timetable or a trail map or a fare calculator. So that's kind of the objective, is make it as intuitive as the current system is making it for cars. The second consideration for the plan and budget is that Grand River Transit Services we're still in recovery mode from the pandemic. Services had been adjusted in 2020 and 2021, and now we've been ramping them up throughout 2022, looking carefully at where demand was picking up and how travel patterns have been affected, and which ones have been most affected by hybrid work. Now the good news is we are back to pre-pandemic ridership levels, moving 100,000 people every weekday, and we've seen especially strong growth on our iExpress bus routes. So this is all funding through our annual operating budget of about $190 million, which is a big chunk of the region's operating budget, but which is also in fact impacted by fuel costs that were mentioned earlier today. And then it's benefiting also from fare revenue. So right now we're still below pre-pandemic fare revenues, but we're looking in 2023 to recover the approximately $40 million of fare revenues that we can get across our different customer groups. That is our regular and occasional users, our university students, as well as the customer base that's eligible to our affordable transit program. For transportation, one key element, that's to the fourth bullet on this slide, one key element to have in mind is going back to some of what Jennifer was talking about our portfolio of assets. We're responsible for the maintenance of that growing and aging. Every year, our assets get at least 1 year older, and then we have new ones that we add to it. They have a replacement value of about $2 billion in 2019 terms. And we know that today the bulk of our roads and our stormwater infrastructure, so that's when I say the bulk, I think the figure is about 41%, is in what we consider fair condition, which is the critical moment at which maintenance and renewal are required, because beyond that, the degradation accelerates, and then that may trigger a need to reconstruct, which is basically 10 times more expensive than maintenance. So a careful balance will have to be struck between daily operations, capital renewal, and growth at a time when we know that basic supplies such as paint or salt are facing sharp inflation. I know paint, for example, the team was telling me it's gone up 35%. So it's kind of crazy, but we need to buy paint to ensure the safety of our roads, and so we have to manage that as well as we can. So that will be critical to ensure that the road network continues to fulfill its critical function to support the economy, especially in the townships where it is a conduit for agricultural vehicles and supporting factories and moving goods across the region. And I'll conclude with the need to invest in active transportation. So we have in the capital program, the 10-year forecast imagines the construction of over 200 kilometers of active transportation connections. So that's more than $100 million that are in the forecasted capital program, just to give you a sense of magnitude of investments in this area. Even though their staging is often connected to where we also need to do some reconstruction of the roads, because the idea is that if we redo the roads too early, it's actually not cost effective from a life cycle perspective. So there's some optimization there that we have to work on. Apart from that, the capital side, I think hand in hand is the service side of things with micro-mobility, such as e-scooters and e-bikes, which we think can be a game changer for urban mobility as they increase the range of mobility for everyday tasks while remaining remarkably affordable. Next slide, please. And so for 2023, this slide highlights just 5 initiatives with maybe the highest transformative potential. So first, the GRT recovery and business plan. So we're adjusting to new ridership patterns, but there are really some new elements in there. The first one is the redesign of the Cambridge Transit Network, which adjusts the routes to the ION backbone. So we've done the redesign in Kitchener and Waterloo, but the Cambridge part was postponed with COVID. And the other transformational one is the gradual transition to electric buses. So starting with hybrid and then running the pilot to understand the scope of the transformation that it requires from an operational standpoint. Second initiative is relative to active transportation. So I mentioned micro-mobility. So as we run a pilot in the next year, as well as we're working on updated our guidelines and operating practices for cycling infrastructure. The third one is about advancing the King Victoria Transit Hub project. That's really about preparing the integration of two-way all-day rail service with our bus and LRT networks in the core. The fourth one is and that's a bit of more kind of forward-looking, looking at 2041, 2051, a new integrated mobility plan to tie together all the ways that people can get around the region and make that connection with our 2050 climate change objectives. And finally, light rail to Cambridge as we close out the planning phase for Stage 2 ION and focus on the funding strategy. And as we do all that, just a plug again, not to forget investments in asset conditions, as our job next year is as much about maintaining what we have and how it supports the current economy, while adding to it, maybe layering up a climate resiliency perspective, as we want to make sure that we are accounting for increasing flood risks and things like freeze-thaw cycles that are affecting the way our infrastructure performs. And that concludes my presentation and open for questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Shantz.
Thank you. Through you to Mr. Getsky. 15-minute neighborhoods sound really good. They also sound very difficult, especially in the rural areas. And so I think of a number of our towns where we can walk around the town in 15 minutes, but we don't have the stores. So a grocery store, for example. And I'm not, that question may not be for you, it may be for Mr. Regier, but how are we going to square that circle?
Well, through the chair, maybe I can start and then pass it over to Rod. I don't think we'll get rid of cars. Cars are, I mean, they're an amazing piece of transportation that was invented, over a century ago. So we're not going to get rid of that. So there are communities that will remain car dependent. I think the move everywhere is to move towards electrification of vehicles, and there will be areas where cars will be needed. Now again, we need to have a very, I would say, a context-specific response to that and make it easier for everyone and at least give options everywhere. So I think this is where we're trying to develop more and more choices for people. I think e-bikes they radically change the range that people can move on with limited or a reasonable amount of effort and open up cycling to new categories of users who would never have thought about cycling before. So that is opening some new opportunities. But then in the land use planning, I think it's just maybe continuing to focus our efforts on the mixed uses that we can develop and the intensification around the nodes that are already existing and already flourishing to build that critical mass that will help with pedestrian access within 15 minutes.
Okay.
Go ahead, Councillor, for a follow-up.
If I could have another question, please. So active transportation, and again, I'm going to talk about the rural areas. Often we do our active transportation along regional roads. Is that the way that we're going to look at it going forward, or do we consider trails, for example? I know I've had more than one email saying, can't we have especially our connecting routes, be on a trail system rather than right against a road where there's a lot of trucks, for example?
Yep, through the chair. I think we're looking at both, and I think we'll need both as travel patterns change. It's true that there are a number of regional roads that are very oriented to support goods movement and that have a lot of trucks. So they won't be, I would say, during the week, they're not going to be very comfortable to cycle on. But it's important I think it's important to start building that infrastructure for the future because habits may change. And we know that trucks, for example, they're highly dependent on the location of the factories that they supply or the agricultural areas that they support. So so things change. So we want to make sure that we're building the right infrastructure for the future. But trails are definitely part of that. I think one of the key elements is we don't want to. And one thing that we want to pay attention to is to not separate too much the different. There's a limit to separation because we also know that to your point on the critical mass that you need, if we put the bikes elsewhere and put the pedestrians elsewhere and the cars elsewhere, and they have different itineraries to go by a grocery store or something like that, it actually weakens the catchment area for that grocery store. So we want to we're also trying to combine things as much as possible so that people have a wide range of options to support the local businesses that they need and the local economy.
Councillor Huonick.
Through you, Chair Harris. Matthew, I believe that phase one of the ION construction was the cost of which was shared relatively equally between the region, the provincial government, and the federal government. Is there a plan that the provincial government or the federal government would take up more of the cost for phase two? Secondly, I believe that the construction phase of the ION phase one was relatively hard on Waterloo businesses. And so in planning for phase two, is there a plan to better support Cambridge businesses that will be impacted by the construction project?
Thank you. Through the chair to Councillor Huonick. Very good questions. On the funding side, that is definitely the strategy is to reach out to provincial and federal partners to see how they can support this big piece of infrastructure, but that also is fully aligned with some provincial and federal objectives. So I think that's definitely part of the strategy going forward. In terms of construction disruption, these are also key elements that we'll consider in due time. Right now, I think we're not quite there yet, but that is definitely a concern. I think there is a lot of preparatory work that can be done. Also, we know that moving utilities and things like that takes a lot of time, and that's often what extends the duration of the construction in front of small businesses that are on the main roads. So that these are things that we have to be very attentive to. So it's not. I think we have to get set the right level of expectations. Construction for big projects like this is disruptive, but it's definitely it's a great question and great great to keep us focused on this as early as possible, so that we make sure that we organize the construction to be as as little disruptive as possible.
Okay, thank you. So just to be sure that I understand correctly, funding concerns and support for local businesses are being worked into the Phase 2 plan.
So today we're, I would say the whole community benefits part that's around this has not been, it's not part of right now we're in the early stages, I would say, of counting, of evaluating the cost of the project, but these are definitely things that we can consider as measures that go along the construction of the project.
Councillor James.
Thank you, through you, Chair Harris. Question about the 15-minute neighborhoods and the first bullet point about aligning with housing development. So after spending months knocking on doors in various areas in this community, there's new development and lack of transportation that the community is calling for. And this is evident in new communities, but also in significantly older communities, there's been transit reduction. So just want some clarification around how are you determining where transit stations are going within neighborhoods, the process for that in creating these 15-minute neighborhoods, because it's very clear in a lot of newer suburban developments there is no transportation, and there's a huge concern there with getting around in the 15 minutes.
Through the chair and to Councillor James, so the criteria for both stations and route selection, they're really, I'd say if I really want to simplify, they're based on ridership. So what we're looking to get is get as many riders as possible on the system for every public dollar that we put into it. So that's really the key element that's determining it. So we're using various, all the data that's available on where people are traveling regardless of the mode, and then new routes are designed based on that. There are ways, I would say, right now one of the key elements that we're looking at, I know we're still testing the on-demand pilot going to Breslau, trying to find other ways of delivering service so we can increase our coverage without, where maybe we're not expecting a level of ridership that would really support a full bus route. So I think we're trying to expand a little bit of the toolbox that we have to be able to increase that coverage. But to your first question, I think it's ridership is really our main the focus that drives us.
Okay, and just kind of a follow-up to that then, in terms of the ways in which we engage with these newer neighborhoods, is anything being done, surveying, speaking to, or some communication going out requesting or understanding access to, or the need for transportation out there?
Through the chair, I don't think we do that specifically, but we use a lot of the land use planning tools to forecast future ridership. So and there maybe sometimes we might be a little bit over maybe too conservative because we think people will reproduce behavioral patterns that they had before, but that's the basis for the analysis. It's a little bit different when we have employment centers because we do have a transportation demand management system by which we go and reach out to employers to incentivize kind of transit use. So things are quite connected with, for example, availability of parking on the employment site, because we know that will really change the behaviors of potential customers. I know we have Neil. Neil is on the line if the chair allows him to jump in.
Sure, Neil.
Good afternoon, through you, Chair Harris. As the commissioners already talked about, when new plans of subdivision are received at the region, the transit development staff review all the new plans. We plan out potential new routes, new bus stops, connections to the existing transit network. So that's all done well in advance when a new subdivision is coming online. And then when it does, of course, we receive lots of requests or feedback from the residents that live in that area. And we try to provide a service, as early as reasonably possible so that we can get riders using the transit system before they buy that second car, before they have a need for that in these new suburban neighborhoods. Certainly, as the commissioners pointed out, we want to get service into new subdivisions as early as possible to facilitate their transportation needs.
Thank you. Councillor Deutschman.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Harris. Just a quick comment. I have an e-bike myself. I think they're fantastic. So if we can incorporate e-bikes into our community, that would be excellent. E-scooters, I'm fine with. I was in Nashville recently and saw e-scooters as I was going through the States, driving through the States, stopped in Cincinnati and Nashville and saw e-scooters strewn about on the sidewalks, et cetera. And certainly they are quite popular down there. But I just want to ask, the 15-minute neighborhood, isn't that whole concept in jeopardy because of Bill 23? I thought the whole purpose of the hue and cry in opposition to Bill 23 was because it was going to impact our ability to implement our regional official plan, our innovative regional official plan. And so I'm just confused why we talk about the 15-minute city but don't talk about the caveat that this could be a problem if the area municipalities aren't adopting it. Was my impression that planning was getting downloaded to the area municipalities. So if you could clarify that, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, through you, Chair Harris, I'll respond to that. So as we're reading the Bill 23, I guess now proclaimed, we see the policies in the regional official plan and the land use mapping for the regional plan being translated into area municipal plans that are the responsibility of the area municipalities. And so the policy framework that has been adopted with regard to building complete communities, 15-minute neighborhoods, and more transit-oriented development is something that we think it will be implemented at the area municipal level. It's certainly something that we're very supportive of. The regional planning conversation that we had with the community was very important in establishing that policy framework, and we had a lot of support from the area municipalities and their planning teams in that conversation. So I would say that the concept of the complete community, the 15-minute neighborhood, is still very much alive and well. The question is how it will be implemented, and certainly we already have an integration of the transit planning team's work with the area municipal planning teams as they're working with developers on plans of subdivision and intensification. That work, I think, will carry on, but it will have a slightly different manifestation in each of the area municipalities.
Councillor Craig.
Thank you, Chair Harris. I have two items here. First of all, it's the 10-year capital plan. Are we going to be able to have a a look at that as we're going through the budgeting process? Because I have concerns with regards to the bypass around Cambridge to town line and what the timelines are for that, and the possibility of a new traffic bridge across the Grand River south of Concession. So are we going to be able to look at that and see what's in it and have input into where it's going?
Oh, sorry, Mr. Dyer.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So short answer is absolutely yes. We are trying to put the final touches on the preliminary 2023 to 2032 capital program. We expect to do that over the next couple of weeks. Our intention is to provide the full preliminary operating and capital budgets to council in time for the January 18th meeting, and you will see a full list of every project that's in the 10-year capital program.
And as a follow-up, Mr. Chair, I'm a bit disappointed in the strategic initiatives that we have seen nothing with regards to GO Transit for Cambridge. Where are we with that? What is happening?
Who'd like to take that on? If it's a,
Through the chair, so it was delicately put behind it. It's hiding behind the bullet, which was about integration of rail transportation. So we've, I know there are still studies and underway to look at that connection between Cambridge and Guelph along the Fergus subdivision. So we can bring that back to you at another time.
Great.
You're going to bring it back? Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah.
Okay.
Councillor Wolf.
Through you, Councillor Harris, is it possible to do a pilot project that allows seniors to ride free one day a week for, let's say, from 9:30 to 3? This would be of great benefit to low-income seniors for social isolation. They could schedule appointments for doctors, et cetera, on a certain day. And what would the possibility be for that, or is it too expensive? What's your thoughts?
Through the chair, I think there are a wide range of fare considerations that we can bring together. I know today we've really focused our the concessions and the reduced fares on specifically to gear them towards low income customers, but there's a range of solutions that are available. So we can present various options, evaluate their potential costs, and evaluate their technical feasibility and how that would work with the EasyGo Pass. And so there's a lot of solutions that can be brought together. So I think that's maybe a broader conversation to kind of shape up the options that we can have at another point in time.
Exactly. Councillor McCabe.
Thank you very much. I just had a question about if it's possible. I know there's challenges around the King and Victoria Transit Hub, but is it possible to give us a sense of the timelines with that?
Mr. Dyer?
So through you, Mr. Chair, yes, there's, if I recall correctly, I believe there's a staff report providing an update on that project that is scheduled to come in the first month or two of next year to give council an overview of the various stages that this project has gone through and what's coming next. So, and you'll see that also reflected in the 10-year capital program.
Okay, thank you very much. And just on a separate question, just on the transportation piece, I'm just curious if there's something through the plan that you'll be bringing forward that deals with issues of speeding in our city, which is, I don't want to dive too deeply into the weeds, but just at a high level, I think it's really epidemic across the cities particularly. I don't know about the townships, but okay, it's worse in the townships, Councillor Johns is saying. I just, safety of people, active transportation users, pedestrians, and safety of people in vehicles themselves it's just such a problem out there.
Through the chair, so I know in the first quarter of next year we are bringing an update to the road safety plan. It has been very much focused on the townships where the conflicts between roads with trucks going 80 kilometers an hour or more, and then entering settlements is even sharper than in cities. But that's a good thing to bring back at that conversation to see if we should open it to some key urban arterials.
Yeah, if you could, that would be appreciated. I mean, I'm thinking of like Fisher Hallman particularly, and I mean, I mean, people are going highway speeds through there, like 80 plus kilometers, and there's, there's Forest Heights High School, there's Resurrection right there, there's plus other, of course, there's pedestrians and things like that, but it's really a problem. So thank you for that.
For sure. Councillor Williams.
Through you, Chair Harris. I probably have 400 questions about Grand River Transit because it's something that interests me very much, but I will leave that for a future time. So I guess my first request would be if you could send me possibly the recovery and business plan once it's finished, or if it's finished already, just so I could look through it. Probably will answer quite a few of my questions. But the one that's kind of pressing is I'm just wondering how soon we're actually planning on recovering from pre-pandemic levels of bus staffing. I know with the weather coming up and, it's getting colder, it's rainy, there are many, many students, people trying to get to work who are left just without a space on the bus because there aren't as many running. And I'm not sure if that's because we're just lacking staff, we're lacking equipment, or it's just we're not back up to pre-pandemic levels. But if you could speak on that, that would be great. Thank you.
Through the chair, I'm happy to. I know that this was prefigured, I think, in the June council from this year, where a number of the different steps towards service recovery were lined up. So I'm happy to share that document back to you. In terms of implementation, I think that there are a number of proposals that they were staged. So first with first ramping up in September with universities and high schools going back to everything in person, there's another stage starting in January where we're bringing back increased service and increased frequencies on the iExpress, especially we do have measures of crowding on a weekly basis, so we're ramping up the service as we see the demand coming up. What's interesting is the university demand is actually above pre-pandemic. So we're seeing ridership on routes like 201 or 202. They're 15 to 20% above our 2019 levels. There's a lot of, and this is partly the number of students is increasing, and but that's something. It's a good news story for them, and we're so starting January 3rd, I think we'll bring that updated service to them.
Councillor Verbanovic, if that was...
Thank you very much, Chair Harris. Just wanted to follow up on the question from Councillor McCabe, and it really had to do with the issue of speeding and the report that's going to come back. I know one of the issues and things that we pursued last term was the issue of speed enforcement in school zones and so on. Part of the problem is, we were part of this pilot with the province. We're using, I think it was Toronto, to do our processing and so on. But as a result of that, we were limited to one camera and I think 16 locations. But the reality is we know that if we want to actually make a dent in some of these problem areas, we need more locations and more cameras, and processing becomes an issue. Is one of the things that the report is going to look at going to be the possibility of setting up our own processing center, which I know was one of the options that is open to us, but we haven't pursued thus far. And if not, could at least some reference to that be included in the report so that council could potentially give some further direction on that if we wanted to go down that route? I don't know who wants to take that.
Sorry.
Sure, through you, Chair. We can bring that back for sure.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Foxton.
Thank you, and what an opportune time to have this discussion. I guess the minister sent several mayors to me to discuss speeding in rural townships, not just in rural townships, in municipalities entirely. We are starting to get a group of mayors together. Our first meeting will be at Roma, the Sunday of Roma. There's a few things. One of the mayors was a past judge, and he's talking about, you know what, I won't get into details. If you're interested in being involved with this group, I guess the minister referred them to me to try and pull this together. Let me know your name. I'll give you the contact information. Because there is some things we may be able to do that will not involve the courts, but it still allow for a type of photo radar with fines. So get in touch with me if you're interested. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Foxton. I believe we've got 2 presenters left, and I'd like to just continue on, and then we'll have a quick break before we turn it over to Mr. Dyer. If everyone's in agreement with that, we'll head on to the next presenter.
Okay, great. Thank you. I'll take a few brief moments to walk through the responsive and engaging public service focus area. This area, in many ways, is foundational to the success of all the focus areas. Next slide. Our strategic objectives in this area include enhancing opportunities for public engagement, input and involvement in Region of Waterloo initiatives, providing excellent citizen-centered services that enhance service satisfaction, attracting, supporting, and retaining skilled, engaged, and diverse employees, and ensuring the region provides value for money and long-term financial sustainability. Next slide. It's an understatement to say that the world has seen changes over the past few years, and part of that change is how we live, work, and interact in our communities. The way that we access essential services, participate in learning, socialize, and do our work have changed considerably in the last few years. More and more, we see how digital technology plays an increasing part in making our lives easier. The pandemic didn't start these trends, but it certainly did speed them up. We also see how resilient communities and businesses are becoming on these new ways and how their expectations are rising. All of this brings opportunities for our organization to be more efficient and effective in how we work and how we deliver our service. The technology is only part of the story, though. Improving also means challenging processes and service models. It means working with residents and businesses to make sure the service experience they receive meets their needs. This is even more important in a fiscally challenging environment where we have to stretch every single dollar that we have. Underpinning all of this is the need to engage with residents, businesses, and other stakeholders effectively. This is at the heart of good government. You heard from our speakers earlier about our efforts in this area. Over the past year, the region has worked with community to find more effective ways to engage, build trust, and relationships. Vaccine rollout and the development of the Community Safety and Wellbeing Plan were 2 examples, and this goes hand in hand with truth and reconciliation and engagement with First Nations communities. Continuing to mainstream these practices and improve representation from diverse communities remains important and a clear focus for us. The next slide. So turning our attention to our initiatives for the next year. Again, this is a story of building on our successes and responding to the considerations I've just shared. I'll just share a few highlights. First off, a big undertaking will be for us to work with you as council to create our next strategic plan. You're already starting to lay the foundation for this through the plan and budget process, but this in many ways is just the beginning, and in December we'll be back to talk more about this process. In 2023, we will bring forward a digital transformation strategy that will help our organization modernize and improve service experience through working differently, aligning technology solutions, and utilizing our data assets. This will go hand in hand with a continued focus on ensuring security and resiliency in our regional data and tech infrastructure. And there will also be work to implement a corporate fraud risk management framework. We've heard a lot about the power of good community engagement practices, and in 2023, we'll work with community to create a new corporate engagement framework to help us on that journey. That's a very quick snapshot of the strategic focus area. I'm happy to take questions on this work.
Seeing none, we will move on. Thank you, Connie.
I bought us some time there. I'll hand it over to my colleague, Kim.
Thank you, Connie, and thank you, Chair and Council. My name is Kim Bellissimo, and I'm the Human Resources and Citizen Service Commissioner here at the Region of Waterloo. And it's my pleasure to share with you what we're doing in the context of creating an environment for our staff to be able to thrive and be well. If you could go to the next slide, please. So these are our strategic focus areas. And building on, again, the existing values that we have in the organization of respect, integrity, collaboration, innovation, and service, these really do guide our behavior. And as we see evidence by that, it creates an environment for people to both be and do their best, and again, be able to thrive in our environment. We actually know that an engaged, motivated workforce there's a strong correlation that they will be able to provide better service to our customers. Happy, engaged, and motivated staff typically provide better service. So this is really important for us to create that environment and sustain that environment for our staff. Learning and development and helping our employees build and grow their career at the Region of Waterloo has become probably one of the most important things we need to do. Recent study will tell us that the number one reason that employees are leaving their place of employment is because there is no opportunity for career advancement or for learning and development. So we're obviously doubling down on this particular area. In addition to that, creating an inclusive workplace is really going to be incredibly important and continues to be important for us. We want staff to come to work every day as their whole self, to be able to come to the workplace as they are and engage and be productive in our environment. In addition to that, well-being. I don't think anyone would say that there isn't an issue around well-being, mental health, resiliency across this country, this province, this city, and this region. So we've developed a comprehensive well-being program that's really very much focused on post-COVID recovery and supporting our staff to be able to be resilient and to thrive. Next slide, please. So these are some of our key considerations as we think about what we're trying to accomplish. And I would suggest to you that these will be our focus for 2023 and beyond, and that they are all equally important and they are mission critical. First, I'd like to focus in on the multi-generational workforce. So we have 4 different generations within our workplace right now. They all have different expectations about their employment experience. And so making sure that we understand that and we create that space for them to be able to have that experience is going to be incredibly critical as we move forward. It's also important to recognize that we have a diverse workforce. And what are we doing to ensure that those who bring their whole self to the workplace, including their diversity, are trusted, respected, and become engaged in a way that allows them to be happy within our workplace. We want to make sure that when we think about our attraction and retention strategy, that we're very much focused on hiring a skilled, diverse, and inclusive workplace now and into the future. In addition to that, I don't think it's a surprise to anyone here that there appears to be a bit of a talent shortage in the province, and we're experiencing that also. So we're very much taking a look at developing a talent attraction strategy to be able to think about what's our niche? Why would people want to come and work at the Region of Waterloo? What is it that's different about us? What's specific in the context of the social capital in our community that would attract top talent? What's so different about our social culture? Or culture capital, and why would people want to work in our organization? So we're very much taking a look at the employee experience and trying to think about ways in which we are able to attract and retain the best and sustain a workforce that is able to deliver on the very ambitious agenda that we've set for ourselves. Particularly, we're having some struggles in hiring key areas such as paramedics, clinical staff in Sunnyside Home. People talked about why there may be some issues around the delivery of bus services in our community. Well, we're having difficulty finding operators to drive those buses. So we continue to take a look at how we can address that in the context of those gaps. And again, I don't think it's a surprise to anyone that we spent the last 2.5 years at the Region of Waterloo partnering with our local area municipal government to try to ensure that we responded in a cohesive, comprehensive, and effective way to a pandemic, something that we never thought we'd ever experience in our lifetime. We've come out at the other end of that, and I would suggest to you that some of our staff haven't come out whole, and that some of them are feeling a bit burnt out. And so we've got a really robust well-being program that we're focusing on to try to address that now and into the future. Next slide, please. So this is our list of things that we're focusing on. This is not the list. This is not the only thing we're doing, but these are some of the key things that have bubbled to the top. And again, these are the things that we're going to be focusing on for 2023 and beyond. Ultimately, we want to create a workplace for the future. What is it that staff who are in multiple generations want to achieve and experience in their workplace? What we do know is that the employee expectations are changing dramatically. And so we really need to think about what does that mean for our workplace and how will we create the programs, supports, and services that facilitate that. We also know that we continue to think about those talent attraction and retention strategies and how we're going to be able to sustain that workforce. And so we're really taking a look at what is the employee experience? What is it that's unique about working at the region of Waterloo? How can we capitalize on that in a way of promoting opportunities for employment within our organization? Continuing with our well-being initiatives, we're going to be piloting a particular program next year. It's a peer support program that's going to help those who are experiencing PTSD in our workplace be able to manage through that very difficult period of time and sustain their ability to attend work or support them while they're off work. Diversity, equity, and inclusion, again, continues to be a real priority for us. I would suggest to you that while work has been underway, we're still at the very infancy phases. This is a very new focus on diversity, equity, inclusion, and we really want to make sure that there is that strong sense of belonging for the staff that work in this organization. In addition to that, to inform that, I should say, we recently just conducted our first census report. We went out and asked employees to self-identify to help us understand the representation within our workforce so we actually know where we're starting. I've seen some preliminary information. It's still under construction. I would suggest to you that the preliminary findings would tell me that we've got work to do. And so we'll be coming back to Council in the future to talk a little bit about what we're proposing. We can't achieve the changes that we need for this organization unless we think about technology. We've talked about digitalization. We've talked about new technology. We've got to think about how we bring technology in, self-serve capacity, and the ability for people to be able to do work differently and create those efficiencies and effectiveness that we want to achieve. We'll be piloting in the new year using AI technology, a chatbot for our call center. The most commonly, asked questions. Every one of us in this room works with AI and chatbots every time you call, Rogers or the Bell or your bank. And so we're just introducing something that all of you are quite familiar with to respond to the community's inquiries in an effective and meaningful way. The last thing I'd like to say is that I'm incredibly excited about the future. I think we just have so much that we can accomplish. I have the privilege of working with a fantastic group of colleagues, my CLT colleagues. I have the opportunity to engage with almost 4,000 dedicated, hardworking, committed regional employees. I'm privileged to be part of this organization. And I want to think about, when I think about what they do for our community, it's these staff who make sure the roads are safe that we drive on. I did hear that some of the roads aren't so safe that we drive on earlier, but make sure that the roads that we drive on are safe, that the quality of the water that we drink in our coffee is something that's not going to make us ill, and that even the keys to our very first home are supported by this organization. I'll stop there and I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Sure, thank you, Commissioner. Councillor James.
Thank you, through you, Chair Harris. You answered part of my question just about employee survey and some of that disaggregated data. I'm hoping we'll be able to see some of that to understand where there are some barriers and gaps within some of the diversity within the region. The other question I have is regarding any employee resource groups, if they currently exist, especially for employees who are either racialized, marginalized within the region.
Thank you for that question, and through you, Chair. So we currently have an employment equity group that we're working with. They actually were part of the consultation process to refine the questions that we used for the census that we recently launched. They'll also be part of the group that will inform the proposed plan to address the concerns identified through the results of the survey. You're welcome.
I don't have any other questions from council. Close out if there are none. That being said, I think we'll take a 10-minute break and we'll return with Mr. Dyer. So 10 minutes, it's 3:37.
very quickly and try to be as respectful of committee's time as possible. So just let me get to my first slide here. And in terms of what I'd like to accomplish over the next few minutes is, to introduce you to the 2023 budget. We've had a couple of orientation sessions where we talked about municipal budgeting at a conceptual level, what's allowed under the Act, what our process generally looks like. This is kind of our first foray into what is actually happening with respect to our 2023 budget. I'm going to explain as, excuse me, as Mr. Lochner indicated in his opening remarks, I'm going to make the argument that this is a very different kind of budget than we've experienced, I would say, certainly in any recent memory. And to provide just a bit of an overview of the process that we're going to follow and a little bit about the budget schedule. And as I think indicated earlier, there is a brief report on your agenda today, excuse me, with a recommendation to adopt a revised 2023 plan and budget review schedule. So just a reminder, this is a slide that we showed in one of the earlier orientation sessions, just kind of making the connection, starting with the official plan, moving through the corporate strategic plan, which this council will be working on in the first couple of quarters of 2023. That will then lead to updates to various service-specific master plans, business plans, operating plans. We'll be providing an update on our asset management policy and plan next year. And then, of course, on an annual basis, the business plan and the budget. And this all relates back in some way to service levels. And if you go back to one of the original slides that Connie showed, the budget provides the resources, the funding and the financing in place in order for services to be delivered. So everything is about the wide range of services that we deliver and at what level that is going to happen. And so in terms of context then, and we think about the environment that we're operating within right now, with respect to our 2023 budget, I've got a few slides following this one that will give you some visual, some pictures of what's happening. We have population growth. We have changing demographics within our population. We have growth in employment. We have a relatively low unemployment rate, a relatively high inflation rate, a significantly high inflation rate, and still significantly high fuel prices. We have experienced significant capital cost escalation, certainly over the last 12 months, and interest rates are at a level that we haven't seen in over a decade. We've been working through supply chain challenges over the last 2.5 years and managing through various waves of COVID-19. From a provincial perspective, because provincial funding is such a significant part of our budget, we have, of course, we had the election back in June, and we have a provincial government that now has a larger majority than the one they went into the election with. That being said, they also have an improved financial position, which I'll show you briefly, certainly with respect to the 2021-2022 fiscal year, certainly projecting a deficit in this fiscal year, but actually had a surplus last year. And as indicated earlier by, I believe by Mr. Sweeney and maybe by others, one of the most significant issues that's now reflected in this budget and that this council will have to consider is the expiry of the Social Services Relief Fund. And I have a couple of slides later on that will explain that. And then just, I wasn't sure whether to put a bullet point on Bill 23. I was hoping to get through one day without talking about Bill 23. That doesn't seem to be possible. We will be providing a more detailed presentation, and there's a staff report on the Administration and Finance Committee agenda for December the 6th. So we'll have more time to talk about Bill 123. And to a number of earlier comments, when, as we think about regional services and the service levels that this council would like to put into place and the objectives that this council would like to achieve over the next 4 years, we have to look at services through in a number of different ways, through a number of different lenses, if I may. The rural-urban mix, the range of community expectations about what the region will and won't do and at what level, through the lens of environment and climate change, and through equity, diversity, inclusion, and Indigenous reconciliation. So a couple of pictures here to drive a few points home. There's been a number of comments about inflation. So this is a chart, if I can see the legend clearly, that shows the consumer price index going back to 2019 and going to the most recent data. So you can see for a period of time we were operating in a fairly narrow range, a very low range. You can see the drop at the time. This is early 2020, at the time that that COVID first hit, and then a steady increase to levels that we haven't seen in over 40 years. 8% back in June. The term that's being used now is inflation is decelerating, but it's still at 7%. So still at levels that we haven't seen in decades. Now, the region doesn't buy what a consumer buys, but we see inflation playing out in a number of different ways in our budget. And the other indicator that we look at is capital cost escalation. So when we look at non-residential building index, you can see the part on the right there that's in the box. So non-residential construction costs are somewhere in the 15 to 17% range over last year. And we've seen that played out over the course of this year in a number of tender results that have come in over budget. And we're certainly seeing it in terms of additional costs that need to be built into our capital program to reflect a much higher level of building costs. So fuel is another area where we've experienced significant escalation in price, and certainly variances in our 2022 budget, and certainly putting some pressure for us in 2023. So these charts, there's two graphs here. The one on the left is for diesel. The one on the right is for unleaded fuel. And I guess the key message here is the green line at the bottom is where we budgeted, and the blue line is what we've been paying. And so some might say, well, why would you have budgeted such a low price? It's an obvious question. But when we were putting the 2022 budget together back in the summer and fall of 2021, $1.06 and $1.08 a liter wasn't an unreasonable number relative to what we were paying at the time. We certainly had not anticipated the conflict in the Ukraine, and certainly had not built into our budget estimates anywhere close to what we've been experiencing. So that's been a significant issue. You can see, I guess, in terms of the most recent developments, unleaded fuel has come down to a much greater extent than diesel. And of course, we are much more exposed on the diesel side because that's what we use in our JRT fleet of 270 or so buses. And it is remaining stubbornly high over the last several months. It's on a bit of a downswing right now. We'll see how long that lasts. The most recent one certainly didn't last very long. So significant inflation, significant capital cost escalation, significant fuel price increases. This is a tough one to describe, but let me try this. So what you're looking at here is the cost of borrowing over the last decade, and the cost of borrowing as measured by a Government of Canada bond. And I think as we may have talked about this at a previous orientation session, our cost of borrowing is at a premium over whatever the Government of Canada bonds are trading at. And so the point here is that the rates that we're experiencing and that we've experienced over the bulk of this year are at their highest rate in somewhere in the 10 to 12 year range. And so what that means is, as we discussed last time, from a capital expenditure perspective, it's costing us significantly more to build new infrastructure, and to the extent that we're borrowing for it, it's costing us significantly more to borrow for it. So that's the double challenge, if you will, from a capital cost perspective, and that's the piece that we're most concerned about. And as you can see, it's basically higher than any other level going back to 2012, and we'd probably have to go a couple of more years back in order to see levels that we're experiencing right now. Unemployment, relatively flat through 2019 into the early part of 2020, and then spiked as COVID hit, and then has gradually worked its way back down, essentially to where we were pre-COVID. So there's three lines here. They're a little hard to see because they generally follow each other. The Kitchener-Waterloo Cambridge, I believe, is red, if I'm seeing that right. Ontario is green. Canada is blue. Again, sometimes one lags the other, but they've been very close, certainly over the bulk of 2022. And then from an Ontario Works caseload perspective, this is a 5-year graph of Ontario Works caseload going back to 2017. The caseload was in a very narrow range for about 4 years, between 9,000 and 9,500, excuse me, per month. And then, excuse me, a spike in early 2020, again, as COVID hit, and then dropped right back down as programs were put in place by the federal government. And those lasted until about the fall of 2021. And the ODW caseload has then come back up, but to a level lower than what we experienced pre-COVID, which I understand is related in part to some additional benefits that the province has put in place since the fall of 2021, which has resulted in fewer individuals being back on the Ontario Works caseload. Ontario deficit, talked about this just a few minutes ago. Here's what the numbers look like. So deficits in 2016, 17, 18, 19, and 20. Quite remarkably, a $2.1 billion surplus in 21-22, and then a forecasted deficit of about $13 billion for this fiscal year. And what makes the surplus so remarkable is that the original estimate for that fiscal year was a $33 billion shortfall. So that was their original estimate. What ended up was a $2.1 billion surplus. We were hopeful that some of that surplus would be reflected in additional funding for municipalities in the fall economic statement from a couple of weeks ago. It was, I would say we were quite disappointed to find that that wasn't the case, particularly with respect to the Social Services Relief Fund. And then to my colleague Rod Regeer's comments earlier about growth and development in the region, this is a table that shows development charge collections over the last few years. And if we just work across the bottom row, relatively consistent amount of revenue for 2019, 20, and 21 in the $85 to $90 million range. What we've experienced so far this year is we've hit that level by the end of September. So it's been a very strong year for development charge collections, which means it has been a very strong year for building permits, which means this is encouraging for assessment growth 2 and 3 years from now, right? So as the buildings get constructed, once they hit occupancy, then they come onto the assessment roll. So it's, we don't see that assessment growth right now. The assessment growth that we experienced in 2022 would have been from building permits that were taken out in the last 2, 3, 4, 5 years. So there's always that lag, but this is certainly encouraging in terms of future assessment growth. And we do have, I think we're just waiting for final confirmation, but we understand that our assessment growth in 2022 for the 2023 budget was just under 2%. So 1.99%, the highest level of assessment growth, certainly in the last 10 years, comparable to 2018 and 2019. We'll talk about assessment growth in much more detail when we get into the early part of January. But essentially what that does is it gives us a larger base over which the regional and the local levies are assessed for property tax purposes. So I'm just going to pause there, Mr. Chair. That's kind of the last of the economic indicator slides. Before I get into a handful of slides about the budget, if there's any questions, this might be a good time for them.
Okay, Councillor Deutschman.
Sorry, Mr. Dyer, with respect to our debt load and interest, when we acquire debt, the interest rate is fixed on that debt, or is it a variable rate?
Through you, Mr. Chair, so the interest rate is fixed for the term of the bond.
Okay, all right. So when you were commenting on the Bank of Canada rate going up, that would be an issue for us with respect to future borrowing, correct?
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair, yes, that's absolutely correct. So as once regional bonds are issued and sold, whatever happens to the Bank of Canada rate and whatever happens to long-term Government of Canada rates doesn't affect all the debt that we've issued. It absolutely affects future debt.
And when I raise this issue about variable versus fixed, I'm presuming that a municipality can only obtain debt on a fixed rate basis?
That's correct.
Thank you. Okay, thank you.
I don't have any further questions at this time, Mr. Dyer.
Great, thank you, Mr. Chair.
I have my...
Sorry, Councillor.
Thanks, Chair Harris. Mr. Dyer, on the fluctuation in the surplus and deficits the province is running. So what would be the reason for this big change again in, was it 23, 22, 23, where it was going to be $12 billion? Like, any crystal balls as to why why that changes like that so dramatically? Like, is it services for the Greenbelt?
I'm assuming that was a rhetorical question.
Well, the chair said I had asked a question.
So I certainly would not want to do any speculation. I think the surplus that they experienced in the 21, so the April 1st, 21 to March 31st, 22 fiscal year was a combination of a significant increase in tax revenues and a significant budget savings on the operating side. So expenditure that they had expected to incur, I think to some extent related to COVID-19, didn't materialize. And as the economy was recovering, there was an influx of additional tax revenue. And the combination of those two things flipped the deficit projection into, a small surplus, $2 billion, but still a small surplus, relatively speaking, to the Ontario budget. Okay, I'll move my comments then into the 2023 budget, and I'm just going to start with a couple of key messages. The first is, as previously indicated, this is a very different kind of budget. I've been saying this for some time. I continue to believe it. I'll explain in the next couple of slides why. The first reason is that the economic conditions that we just went through in terms of inflation, capital cost escalation, fuel prices, and the cost of borrowing are placing a huge pressure on regional service costs. It's the single largest impact that we're experiencing in our 2023 budget. And then secondly, the gap, what we've in the past here called either the service gap or the expectations gap between what is expected of regional government and our fiscal capacity to fund those services in my view, has reached a critical level. The region is funding services that serve an income redistribution nature. We're funding homelessness programs, we're funding housing programs, seniors programs, children's programs, public health programs that arguably have a much broader objective and really should be funded in a different way. The property tax was really never designed to fund those types of services. We find ourselves funding them more and more. And there's probably no better example in the 2023 budget than homelessness programs, where the region is looking to establish a higher, a better level of service at the same time as provincial funding for homelessness programs is expiring at the end of next month. So when we look at our 2023 budget, our operating position as it currently stands, there's a few messages I want to get across with this slide. So first of all, so what you're looking at is the approximate impact of the most significant drivers of next year's budget. So the y-axis, the vertical axis on the left, is in millions of dollars. And across the bottom are the various categories of increase or decrease that lead us to a levy projection that's about $50 million higher than last year's. And the very first bar on the left is inflation. So we've estimated that to keep delivering the levels of service that are currently being delivered, inflation and cost escalation alone equal approximately $37 million. These are levels of inflation that we've never experienced. You know, when I think back to the 10 budgets that I've been part of here at the region, excluding this one, they were all done in an environment of low and stable inflation and historically low cost of borrowing. And both of those came to a crashing halt earlier this year. And we've been experiencing, or even last year, and we're now experiencing almost record high, certainly 40-year high inflation, and now 12 to 14-year high cost of borrowing, depending on where things are over the course of a day. So inflation, certainly the most significant driver for our 2023 budget position. Homelessness programs and the interim housing strategies that were endorsed back in August of this year and that are being built into the 2023 budget are the next most significant portion. But built into there is the elimination of the Social Services Relief Fund. So not only are we experiencing not only does the budget reflect the additional costs for that level of service, but it's also now taking into account the removal of about $7 million of funding from what we refer to as the SSRF. So in an attempt to mitigate the impact, it's a significant impact, it's another, if I'm reading this right, it's about $15 million of levy impact in 2023. What staff are proposing in the preliminary budget is we have about $7.5 or $8 million of COVID money, 100% COVID money from the province that we've received over the last couple of years that we propose to apply to these costs in 2023. So the second bar there is a $15 million increase, and we're suggesting that that $15 million gets phased in over 2 years. And the way we do that is by applying about $7.5 million of funding on a one-time basis in 2023. And so rather than $15 million hitting the levy all in 1 year, we spread it over 2, because this is a one-time funding source. But we think it's appropriate use of the funding. We think it helps us to phase in these costs. Ideally, we would have additional funding from the provincial government through the next stage or phase of a social services relief fund. but our understanding, at least at this point, is no such funding is available after December 31st of this year. And then working our way to the right, the next item we have is service level, I think it's service level adjustments and expansions. And this is a few things. One of them is increased level of service for our paramedic services, again, endorsed earlier this year. And to my colleague Mathieu's comments earlier on, the reinstatement of GRT service hours in order to meet the service demand. What staff have been able to do so far is identify another approximately $6 million in inefficiencies in base budget adjustments that don't impact service levels that are reflected in these numbers. And when you take all of these factors together, it produces a levy increase in the range of $50 million over last year. And so what I would say is these are numbers that we just haven't experienced in the past. Certainly not to this magnitude, and this is really why this budget is very different from the previous ones. And so to keep delivering on the services that are in place, to expand services in certain areas, to manage the provincial funding reductions would require, at this point, an additional $147 to the average household annually. And I've got a table at the end here that will describe that in a bit more detail. So inflation and cost escalation, I've given you the numbers, so you know what the rates are. Inflation is impacting all aspects of our budget, whether it's materials and supplies, whether it's fuel, whether it's service contracts, and our capital program are all impacted in ways that we've really never experienced. And I've already made the point about capital projects cost more to build, and they also cost more to finance. And just we asked our folks in our procurement area to give us a few examples of where we're experiencing cost escalation. And these are just a few that they came up with. A wide range of impacts, chemicals for water treatment anywhere between 11 and 98%, traffic cable wire at 36%. I think the painting contract was mentioned earlier. The point here is that it's not a consistent impact across all service areas. Inflation affects different areas and different supplies and services differently across the region. Overall, when we take everything into account, again, it's approximately $37 million of increase in our 2023 budget. With respect to service expansion, just a couple of slides on this. I'm going to start with service expansion in the 2022 budget. And one of the terms you'll hear us use over the course of the budget review process is annualization. And so for those of you not familiar with the term, basically when a new service or, for example, a new facility comes into service partway through the year, in the year that happens, we only budget for a part year. So using the Northfield Transit facility that some of you were at last week, we took ownership of that building in March and started delivering service out of it in September. So in 2022, we only budgeted for a part year of costs to reflect what was actually going to happen over the course of that year. When we go into 2023, we need to annualize the costs to show a full year of either costs and or revenues. And so what we have in our 2023 budget is the annualization of a number of service expansions that were part of the 2022 budget. And this includes the airport expansion, it includes the maintenance and storage facility on Northfield, it includes paramedic service resources that were added as of July 1st of this year. They now need to be budgeted for a full year next year, as well as some climate action investments. And there are other smaller ones as well, but I would say that these are the most significant. The other thing that happened in 2022 is that there was a small number of service enhancements that were approved by council subsequent to the 2022 budget. I think we've talked about all of these already. One is the paramedic services, which was a phased-in increase in service in 2022, in 2023, and now we're suggesting in the early part of 2024, the Grand River Transit service hours that I've already mentioned, and then the interim housing strategies as well. All of these service expansions are now reflected appropriately in the 2023 budget. Homelessness programs and funding. So I think there's a couple of key points here to understand, because this leads us to the Social Services Relief Fund. So a little over 20 years ago, the province downloaded responsibility for social housing to municipalities. However, they retained funding responsibility for homelessness programs and have been funding municipalities through various programs. One of the more recent ones was the Consolidated Homelessness Prevention Initiative, I think. The most recent version is a homelessness prevention program. I don't know if I have the right words, but the point is the province has been providing that funding historically. And the region has supplemented that funding with a small amount of levy funding. Prior to 2022, this was in the $2 to $2.5 million range. As Councillor Erb correctly pointed out earlier, that funding was increased in the 2022 budget to about $5.5 million. And then most importantly, the operating model for shelters changed because of COVID. And the need for physical distancing was introduced, and that increased, certainly increased the cost, certainly increased the number of facilities that were needed to be operated. And what's happening now is that level of service continues to stay in place, yet the provincial funding is now disappearing at the end of this year. And as was said by perhaps Councillor Craig early on, we're poorly equipped to fund these kinds of programs. The property tax was never designed to fund this type of program, unlike the federal and provincial governments who have access to many, many more sources of revenue. The other thing I'd like to say about the budget is every year, staff go through a process of identifying base budget reductions, efficiencies, cost savings, essentially, across all of our different areas. And that they vary from year to year, both in quantum and in type, but it's everything from utilities and energy savings as we put more energy efficient projects in place, reviewing our staffing levels, looking at overtime requirements, looking at new user fees and charges to generate revenue, looking at various purchases and consulting fees, and in some cases, service level adjustments. And they have varied over the year. I would just point out that in 2021 and 2022, we had a much more significant level of reductions identified. And this is as we were looking for the capacity, if you will, to fund new priorities that were put in place over those 2 years. So a significant amount of adjustments and savings identified, particularly in 2021 and 2022. Our preliminary number for the 2023 budget is just over $6 million, and that will at some point get added to this table. So it's an important part of our budget preparation exercise that we go through every year. So, Mr. Chair, my final couple of slides here, just going back to the $147 per household number that I quoted earlier. So this is, so based on the budget as it currently stands, which, as Mr. Lochner said earlier, is not a recommendation at this point, but it's just our current position. If it was to be approved, it would add about $147 a year on a typical residence with a current value assessment of $354,000. And before you ask the question, there is no house that you can buy for $354,000. We understand that. And the reason for that is every property in the province of Ontario has a January 1st, 2016 value. Even if it was built after that, MPAC, the Municipal Property Assessment Corporation, uses some type of, I think, a deflator table to take a current value and put it back to a 2016 value. And that's what every property, commercial, industrial, residential, multi-residential, farmland, every property in the province has a January 1st, 2016 valuation date. When that date is going to be updated is not yet clear. We were hoping to hear that in the fall economic statement, but we didn't. More on that when we get to January. Anyway, the point here is that the $147 increase is basically $109 for inflation, $55 for service expansion, everything else is a $17 reduction. And what that gives us, what that would give us, again, based on the numbers as they are today, is a 9.8% increase in property taxes for regional services, excluding police. So think back to the slide that we went through in council orientation, property tax bill, regional portion, lower tier portion, education portion. So this is on some of the regional, the non-police part of the region's budget would be at 9.8%. And we're going to show you that we're working on a clever visual way to describe that we hope to bring back to Budget Committee when it meets next on December the 14th. And then finally, Mr. Chair, just an excerpt from the staff report that's before you today with respect to the budget schedule. What we're proposing, so just working our way down, November 30th, today's meeting, we're proposing that Budget Committee get back together in 2 weeks on December 14th. A small typo there, it should say 1 p.m. to 5 p.m., not 2 p.m. The police board, as we understand, is scheduled to approve their budget on January 18th. That would then be the first detailed review of the region's 2023 budget. You would have the book, the document that I referred to earlier that has all of the operating budgets, all of the capital projects for all regional services. That would also be the date of a public input meeting on January the 18th. And then we would get back together on February 8th and February 22nd. These are all Wednesdays. February 22nd would be final budget day when the budget and user fees and charges would get approved. And there was one piece I missed there, which was the police services budget presentation, tentatively scheduled for the 1st of February. And our recommendation in the report would be for you to adopt this timetable, and if so adopted, then you would see these meetings booked into your calendar relatively shortly. And Mr. Chair, that concludes my comments. Thank you.
Questions for Mr. Dyer. Councillor Huenick.
Through you, Mr. Chair. I don't expect that you'll have this answer now, Mr. Dyer, but maybe you can come back to it around, have there been other municipalities that have advocated for continuance of the SSRF? If not, should we be trendsetting in that direction?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Very good question, which I can answer now. The short answer, I think, is absolutely. This is, I would say, perhaps either the top, it's either the top or the second most significant issue for almost every region and single tier across the province. The expiry of this funding is extremely challenging for upper and single tiers across the province. Certainly from a staff perspective, we've been advocating to our staff contacts at the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing. I believe there's also been some advocacy through AMO, through Marco, which Chair Redmond is chairing, and so there may be more to offer there. But I think this is something that we've made as clear as we can with the province how important this is, and I think it's something that we'll continue to do.
So the advocacy is already in place as of now.
So I would say that it is in place. It probably needs more.
Okay. Let us know what we can do to support that.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Councillor James.
Through you, Chair Harris. I'm just looking at the schedule here. and I'm really conscious about the numbers and what this looks like in public interpretation. I'm wondering if we could possibly consider adding in a third public input. Something to consider down the road, but I think this budget is going to have a significant amount of public engagement given what we're looking at, and this doesn't even include the police budget.
So through you, Mr. Chair, we're in council's hands here. If a third public input meeting is desired, we can certainly find a way to do that. You can either make that decision now or wait until the early part of January. I think that's entirely up to you. In terms of timing, we've tried to schedule them to reflect. We wanted to make sure that there's information out and available. So January 18th seemed like a good time for the first one. The second one right now is scheduled for February the 8th. If there was going to be another one, I would say it should probably happen certainly before the 22nd, maybe in the off week between the 8th and the 22nd might be a good time for a third. But we're certainly, we can certainly take guidance from council as to what you wish.
Thank you. Councillor Deutschman.
Thank you, Chair Harris. Mr. Dyer, I have a couple of questions. First off, with respect to the schedule, there's no magic to the February 22nd date, is there? We can issue interim tax bills to the public, and generally those are done without finalization of, the finalization of our budget doesn't determine that, does it?
Through Mr. Chair, that's correct. The region's budget doesn't need. Actually, neither the regions nor the lower tier budgets need to be approved in order for interim tax bills to be set out. That is right. Absolutely correct. I think there's benefits and advantages to getting through the budget process as expeditiously as possible, but also making sure that council is comfortable with the material and making the decisions. The longer the budget process goes, the less time there is to implement the plan and the services that are in that budget. It means we're not in a position to issue tenders for capital projects, for example. And there's a lot of advantages in having an early approval of capital so that tenders can get out on the street, as early as possible. But no, there is no magic to February 22nd.
Right, and following up on that, issuing tenders for capital projects at this current time is questionable given your chart showing the rapid escalation in capital costs. So there may be a benefit in deferring some capital projects. With respect to 1% levy, how much is that?
Just over
1% per household.
Through you, Mr. Chair, just over $6 million.
Okay, thank you. And on a per household basis, what would that be?
$21.
Okay, thank you. And when you were referencing the MPAC assessment and the $147 per household, regardless of what someone's house is worth, it's $147 if it's a 9.8% tax increase. Is that correct?
It was calculated based on a 9.8% tax increase for regional services on an average household. So the 9.8 would be consistent across the board. The dollar amount would be different depending what the assessed value is.
Right. So if the average household sale now is, let's say, $800,000, it's not based on that number, correct?
Absolutely not.
Okay. No. Sorry, were you going to say something else?
No, just to say that the assessment update was supposed to happen it was either 2020 or 2021 to bring that January 1st, 2016 date to a more current value. I think it was January 1st of 2019, maybe even 2020. The reassessment was deferred because of COVID in 21, in 22, in 23. So we know in 2023 that the January 1st, 2016 values are going to continue to be used.
Right. But if we wanted to raise $147 on average per household, it doesn't really matter what they're assessed, what the impact assessment is, just alters the percentage increase. If impact values go up and we would just want $147 per household, then we're not looking at a 9.8% increase then.
So through you, Mr. Chair, so technically I don't think that's correct. So
Okay.
we have to distinguish budget impacts from reassessment impacts. So for example, say that the province said for 2023 they were going to update the valuation date to January 1st of 2022.
Okay.
Every property in the province would then get a new value, in many cases a much higher value, but that doesn't generate any additional revenue because there's then a restating of the tax rate to create revenue neutral tax rates. So reassessments don't generate any revenue. The only thing that generates revenue is the region's budget. And so the 9.8%
so I think that was the point I was trying to make, yes. Has there been, and again, because this is new council, prior to new council, was there discussion as to what the, again, target tax rate increase would be going into these discussions?
Through you, Mr. Chair, no, there was not. Staff provided two preliminary budget reports to council over the course of this year. One was in June, one was in October. The numbers that we're seeing and experiencing right now are generally consistent with what staff had projected and estimated through those reports. But no, there was no specific target or guideline for the 2023 budget from the previous council.
Could you go to page 61, please, of your presentation? So the question I have here is the only source of funding for this from the tax base, is that the only thing that finance has looked at with respect to financing for this?
Well, through you, Mr. Chair, certainly not. As we've talked about before, the main sources of revenue for the region in terms of our own funding, so leaving aside provincial subsidies, federal subsidies in some cases, we have property taxes and we have user fees and charges. And so as part of the budget, the folks within finance work with each of the program areas to review user fee and charge revenue. Most significantly, Grand River Transit fare revenue is approximately a $40 million budgeted revenue item. Other significant revenues include rent at our Waterloo Region housing units, tipping fees at our landfill sites, and of course, water and wastewater revenues. So all of those sources of revenue have been looked at and adjusted accordingly for the 2023 budget.
But just specifically on this point here, the 50 million net levy increase, is that based on property tax or is it all those sources you just cited?
No, the far right column on this chart is the current position of our property tax levy increase. So once we've taken into account all the changes in expenditure and all the changes in non-property tax revenue, the user fees that I just spoke to, what falls out from that, so total expenditure, less provincial subsidy, less user fees and charges equals the tax levy. And so right now, based on the budget as it stands, we need about a $50 million tax levy increase in 2023.
One last question, Chair Harris, if I may.
Yeah, no, good. We'll move on to great.
Okay. Have we looked at any reserve funds available that could assist with this? Because I'm specifically looking at we're deferring over 2 years, and I just want to know what exactly it is we're deferring and why we're deferring over 2 years, as you mentioned, with respect to the homelessness programs. And I'm going to want to see what we have available to us in the reserve funds, including any capital funds that we have control of. And I'm not talking about anything like the gas tax levy or anything like that, that we as a council can control, and we as a council can decide to shift and defer some capital projects to deal with this social services deficit in our community. And this is a serious issue. So have you looked at any reserve funds, or are there any reserve funds available?
Excuse me, through you, Mr. Chair. So yes, we have. I would say specifically, and we can certainly bring back the details of what we've built into the budget. Our tax stabilization reserve, for example, is proposed to be used in a few different places. One is to help ease the impact of the higher fuel prices. We've had a long-standing practice of using the tax stabilization reserve to bridge finance, if you will, the provincial funding associated with paramedic services expansions. We've also used the tax stabilization reserve to phase in the both the equity, the equity funding in 2023. So that's one area where we have used those reserves. And we can certainly bring additional information back. I would say that using a reserve in your operating budget has to be done on a sustainable basis, right? So to the extent that it's a one-time, you have to be very conscious of using one-time sources of funding. What we're proposing here in terms of the unallocated Safe Restart funding is to help, let's say, phase in the additional costs associated with homelessness. So, for example, if we hadn't brought that $7 million in, we'd have a $57 million levy increase and a percentage that was well over 10, if not 11%. My final comment, Mr. Chair, is I would caution council about looking to defer capital projects in order to solve the operating budget problem. It doesn't work that way. And it's an extremely dangerous path to go down. If there's an interest in deferring capital projects, that's fine. And you should absolutely have that conversation. But don't assume it's going to solve your operating budget problem, because it won't.
Councillor Williams, you're next. You're next.
Through you, Chair Harris. I was just looking for a point of clarification. So with the homelessness budget, it was 15.2 million. Was that in addition to what we're already spending? That's just projected what we'll have to come up with to operate how we normally do, anticipate future need, and then also for the 7.5 deficit that the government is taking away?
Yes, so it's a great question. Yes, and so what you see in that second bar from the left is the incremental tax levy requirement to fund homelessness programs in 2023. So yes, it's over and above what's already in the budget.
Okay, and then so my second follow-up question would just be then, if for some reason we did somehow procure funding from the provincial or federal government, would that then be added back in, and then we may not have to do the two one-time extra assessments?
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you.
Councillor Craig.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm coming back to the 9.8. Do we have any idea of what we might look at in terms of the police budget? A possibility on top of that? Would it be 1.5% or 1%? Would that be what we're looking at?
So through you, Mr. Chair, so one of the things that we will bring back in 2 weeks is some more details about how the tax impacts actually work. So what we would say is, so leaving the region's budget aside for the moment, which would be a 9.8%. If the police budget went up by, I think the most recent number they had was in the 8% range. So if there was an 8% increase on the police budget, And the police budget represents about a third of the region's levy in total. So we would, so I would say if the region was at 9.8 and the police was at 8, we would end up with a tax increase overall at about 9%. Because it's essentially, without starting a math class, it's essentially a weighted average, right? You're taking 2/3 of your levy and inflating it by some percent for the region, 1/3 of your levy and inflating it by a different percent for police, and then we put them together to come up with an overall percentage.
Okay. The last thing, and I mean, the way this is being presented, and I think it's obviously very well done in terms of its thoroughness, professionalism, and everything. It looks like a fait accompli to a great extent, 9.8. That's what we're looking at. We can talk about it as we go into the budget. I think the last thing you want is for me to go home for the next 2 or 3 weeks and start slashing away at the budget, because I'd be going down a dark path, I would think, to some extent. I'm wondering if you could not come back with your staff and look at a lower budget that shows what would happen if we reduce the budget, say, to 8%. So it would give us some options to see what's out there with regards to cuts. And I think the community needs to see that. I think we need to see it. I don't think, and I think you're the best person, obviously, I say that respectfully, that can look at the budget as much as you wouldn't want to do it, but to come back at a lower percentage so we could see what the impacts, and the community could see what the impacts would be.
So through you, Mr. Chair, a two-part response. One is we're absolutely not looking at this as a fait accompli. Certainly not. This is the current position that we're in right now.
I understand that.
And,
I'm not being critical, sir.
No, understood, absolutely. I just wanted to make sure that was clear, like from a staff perspective, we know that there's still more work to do. And to the question about 8% or some other level, I think, that's the kind of guidance we'll look for from this committee, either today or as we work through the process. Again, this has been staff's budget to work on for many months now. It's now, from our perspective, become council's budget, and this is up to you to give us direction as to what it is you want to see as we go through the process.
If I may, Mr. Chair, then I would request, or respectfully request, that staff look at lower percentages in the 8%, and as an example, so that we can see what cuts would take place, and the public would understand the difficulty of what we're facing. I know, but I can't. Because right now, we're coming in at 9.8, and I know that's temporary. It's not acceptable. We can't do that in this climate. So that's my request, and I'll leave it up to you, Mr. Chair, and Chair Redmond, okay?
I'm going to continue on with the list perhaps, but I don't know, Mr. Dyer, if it's something that we want to do a straw poll here with council, or if that's something that you're prepared to already do as part of the process now between now and then, or maybe provide some guidance on from your perspective.
Yeah, I think from a staff perspective, Mr. Chair, getting a sense from the committee as a whole, if that's direction that the committee would like to see, then we will certainly do that, and bring those options back for you, likely early in the new year, if that's the will of this committee.
Is that Mr. Craig, Councillor Craig? Good. Yeah.
That's my suggestion, Mr. Chair.
I'll get out to the list here if you don't mind. Councillor James. We'll come back
Through
to
you,
that.
Chair Harris. Just a question with the current slide that's on there. I'm wondering where our recent federal housing funding, if this is allocated in here yet or not, where are we with that? And if that's part of this? Thank you.
Yes, a very good question. There is some amount of federal funding for housing built into the budget, which is a continuation of funding that we've received over the last couple of years. The bulk of it, I believe, will be found in the capital program, because that's where most of that funding is directed. And so when we show you the the full housing services capital program, you'll see the individual projects and the ones that are funded through federal subsidies.
I'm going to move to Councillor Redmond next. Chair Redmond, sorry.
Thank you, Chair Harris. I really appreciate the way Councillor Craig has posed the question, but I would suggest that maybe it's a bit premature because I've also heard from other councillors around the table that they would like to know the costing of things that may get added into. So this is almost a bit of a business as usual, which is what staff had to work with to bring to us. So I think everybody wants to see a cost-effective budget, but I'm going to go back to Mr. Dyer's comment about this being one of the toughest budgets in the 10 years that you've been doing budgets for the region, and the fact that the biggest single factor is really inflation. So I think there are things that we are subject to as we travel through this budget that we don't have control over. So I think it would behoove us to find out the things we do have control over. And again, I just I understand where Councillor Craig is coming from, but I think it's premature to make that kind of direction to staff at this juncture.
Well, thank you, Chair Redmond. Councillor Erb.
Yeah, I was going to add as well. I'm wondering if it's a wee bit early, and I think Mr. Dyer's comments previously today were that staff have another 2 or 3 weeks of work to do in the final preparation of the budget. And I'm wondering if, in fairness, we would allow that to happen. And I'm just quickly looking at the schedule here. So our next budget meeting is December the 14th, and I'm not sure if that work would be completed by December the 14th, where we could then consider something that Councillor Craig is suggesting. Is that not a reasonable time frame? I think it's important to give staff as much of an opportunity as they can to present the whole picture, the 10,000-foot view to us before we start making some specific suggestions.
Yeah, so through you, Mr. Chair, I would say it's far more likely that we would have that ready for you in the early part of January.
Oh, okay.
Unlikely that we'll be able to complete that and present it in a understandable, cohesive way by December the 14th.
I'll come back to you, Councillor Craig.
I guess my feeling would be to give staff a chance to present the big picture before we start doing some specific instructions.
Councillor Deutschman and then Councillor Craig. I got a list in front of me I'm following, so you're on the list.
Thank you, Chair Harris, and I await anticipation to the comments from Councillor Craig. I think I understand what Councillor Craig is doing. We all need to know what is the worst case scenario and try and find out the bad news as quick as possible. But I think we need to get a better sense of what are we facing in conjunction with the police services budget, so we get a bigger, better overall picture. And I think, look, this is a budget unusual. And we're going to have to look at some unusual moves. And I appreciate Mr. Craig's comments earlier with respect to capital. But again, extraordinary times, they might be temporary times, and these are temporary actions we need to look at. And we have to say there's no red light but a green light in terms of looking at all options and all possibilities here. And I don't want to foreclose anything that that we may have an opportunity to do, and we haven't done it. I don't like to hear that's not how we used to do it, or that's not how we do it. I like to hear, let's take a look at what we can do and what are some of the possibilities. And I know, Mr. Craig, that you are, or sorry, Mr. Dyer, that you are an excellent finance person. You and I have worked together in the past, and I look forward to trying to find some creative ways that we can lessen the impact and also maximize our ability to respond to the social issues. And look, I'm there with everyone else on the province, but I'd rather try to see what we can do assume the province is giving us nothing and see what we can do. And then anything we get from the province is a windfall. And of course, continue the advocacy. So I think we need to give it a little more time, and we need to see what the impact of the police budget is going to be, or get a better sense of that as well. Thank you.
Councillor Craig.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate all the comments, and I think they're all valid. I accept them. I'm just saying that when we get to that critical point, when we have everything we could possibly have, I'd like to see what it would look like if we asked for a lower budget. That's all I'm asking.
Yeah.
And as far as the capital goes, I want to look inside that capital and see what's there. I'm not suggesting I'm adding anything. I may suggest we might change some things. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, thank you. I don't have anybody further on the list unless there's others that want to chime in. I mean, just from my perspective, I know we outlined earlier on in the beginning of the meeting how, none of us expect to be, where we are today when we sit down in February. So I know there's a lot of heavy lifting to do. I know that folks have heard, today from staff, all of the different areas that we'll be faced with and the decisions. And I know that come January, there'll be more information that will flow for council to make, much better decisions. So, Mr. Dyer, if you have any departing words or what have you, if not, we'll carry on.
Thank you for your attention today.
All right. With that being said, I know we were going to. Yeah. So we are. Okay, right. So thank you, staff, for thorough presentations and all the work that you have undertaken in the previous months and as well the coming months. We obviously have two reports on the agenda to deal with at this point. The first needs a motion to approve the 2023 Plan and Budget Review timetable. Is there a mover and a seconder for that recommended motion? Moved by Councillor James, seconded by Councillor Salonen. We will now start the vote. Please use your yes or no button to vote on eScribe. If you have. That is carried. The second report was covered during the presentation, and we all had an opportunity to ask questions. So we will receive this report for information. There are no communications. Is there any other business? Seeing none, we will now start to vote to adjourn the meeting. Is there a mover and a seconder for that? Councillor McCabe, Chair Redmond, please use your voting buttons on eScribe. The motion is carried. Yes? That was the previous one. That was the previous one.
Mr. Chair, point of order.